What's good, everyone? This is Bald Voldemort, and boy do we have a treat for you. What if Harry Potter died at Hogwarts and awakens his forbidden X gene that made him invincible? Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. The boy who died twice the night the Death Eaters came. Harry Potter was thinking about nothing more dangerous than whether Gryffindor could hold a 50-point lead against Ravenclaw in the second half. The floodlights the Ministry had grudgingly permitted after last term's attack on the train buzzed along the top of the stands, throwing long yellow bars across the pitch. It was the first night match Hogwarts had played in years. Dumbledore's idea, something about giving the students their ordinary lives back, even the small ordinary things. And nobody had argued with him, not with the way the last 12 months had gone. Harry sat high in the stands next to Ron, a cup of butterbeer going flat in his hand, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't thinking about Voldemort at all. "They're going to lose their minds if Ginny lands this next chase," Ron said, half standing. "She's not going to land it, she's setting up for Demelza. She is not, look at her wrist." Ginny Weasley cut across the pitch below them in a red blur, and whatever she was setting up for, she scored it herself. A clean shot through the middle hoop that sent half the stadium up out of their seats screaming. Harry laughed, actually laughed, the kind that came from his chest instead of his throat, and elbowed Ron in the ribs. "Wrist," Ron muttered, sulking, but he was grinning too. Hermione, on Harry's other side, had a book open on her knee that she wasn't reading, because even Hermione Granger couldn't ignore a match this good. 60-10, she said. "If Zhang doesn't catch the snitch in the next 20 minutes, we've basically won regardless." "Never bet against a seeker with something to prove," Harry said. "You would say that. I'm always right. You caught your first snitch by falling off a broom, and I still caught it. It was such a small, stupid, perfect argument." Later, much later, Harry would think about how strange it was that the last completely ordinary 5 minutes of his old life were spent bickering about broom skill with his two best friends while a Quidditch match happened underneath him and the sky was clear and full of stars and nothing at all, felt wrong. Then the floodlights went out. Not flickered. Not dimmed. Out, all of them, all at once, like someone had reached up and snuffed the sky itself. For one full second the entire stadium held its breath in perfect, ringing darkness. 800 students and staff froze in mid-cheer. Then the screaming started. Harry was on his feet before conscious thought caught up with his body, wand already in his hand. Years of war had taught his hands to move faster than his fear could, and Ron was up beside him just as fast, and somewhere below in the sudden black, Madame Hooch's whistle screeched once and cut off. Lumos. Hermione's voice, sharp and clear, and a bead of white light bloomed at the tip of her wand, and then another, and another, spreading through the stands like frightened fireflies as everyone remembered they had wands at all. By the wavering light Harry saw them, black shapes dropping out of the dark sky above the pitch, cloaks snapping like sails, silver masks catching the little points of wand light. 15 of them, more still coming, sweeping down over the goalposts on broomsticks that made no sound at all. Death Eaters. Ron breathed unnecessarily, because everyone in the stadium already knew. Everyone in Britain had learned to recognize that particular shape of terror falling from a night sky. "Get the first years down the tunnels, now go, Gio." That was McGonagall's voice, cracking across the stadium like a whip. And prefects who drilled for exactly this moment, for exactly this reason, began hauling younger students bodily toward the exits, wands lit, voices steady even though half of them were shaking. Harry didn't think about running. He never had, not once, not in 6 years of being the person this war kept aiming itself at, and he wasn't about to start with Ginny still down on the pitch, grounded, exposed, 20 feet from the nearest Death Eater's wand. "Ron, get people out of the stands." "Hermione, going with you." Hermione said, already moving, and there wasn't a second wasted arguing about it, because that was who they were, that was who they'd always been. They went down the stairs 3 at a time. Below on the pitch, chaos had a shape to it now, students scattering, the remaining players diving low and fast to get out of the killing zone, Madame Hooch throwing hexes at anything that got close to a child. But Ginny was still up there, hovering wand out, screaming something at a first-year Ravenclaw who'd frozen midair, too scared to fly. A curse, green, unmistakable, split the dark not 10 feet from her. Giny. Harry's wand was already moving, a shield charm blooming huge and hard in front of her a half-second too late to matter, because the curse missed her by inches anyway, closer than any inch should ever be, and something in Harry's chest went white-hot and absolutely still. He hit the ground running before he'd finished the last flight of stairs, vaulted the low wall onto the pitch itself, and the masked figure who'd thrown that curse turned toward him with what might have been a laugh behind the silver. "There he is," the Death Eater said, delighted like a man who'd found what he came for. "Told you he'd come running." Expelliarmus. Harry didn't wait for banter. The disarming spell caught the man mid-turn and threw him backward off his broom into the mud of the pitch, wand spinning away into the dark. And Harry was already moving on to the next threat, because there were 15 of them, and this wasn't going to be one with clever one-liners. Hermione was a step behind him, stunning a second Death Eater with a spell so fast and precise it barely made a sound. Ron had abandoned the stands to half a dozen prefects and come sliding down onto the pitch too, red hair flying, roaring something that might have been a battle cry, or might have just been Ron being Ron under pressure. For almost a minute, it looked like they might actually hold. Then the sky tore. Not literally, though it felt that way, the sudden pressure of it, the way the air itself seemed to bend. But a second wave came through the dark clean and fast and organized in a way the first hadn't been, and at the center of it, robes black as the space between stars, was a shape Harry had seen in nightmares his whole conscious life. Voldemort didn't land. He simply arrived, feet touching the grass of the Quidditch pitch as though the pitch had been waiting for him, red eyes finding Harry across 40 feet of chaos, with the terrible, patient accuracy of something that had been hunting for a very long time, and had just, finally, run its prey to ground. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice cut through the screaming and the spellfire like it belonged there more than any of it did. "How considerate of Dumbledore, to gather you all in one bright, well-lit box." "It's not a trap if I already know you're in it," Harry said, and his voice didn't shake, and he was almost surprised by that himself. But there wasn't time to examine the feeling because Voldemort's wand was already moving. What followed wasn't a duel. Harry understood that within the first 3 seconds, a duel implied some kind of parity, some kind of exchange. And this was simply Voldemort testing how fast he could kill a 17-year-old boy standing in the open on a lit-up Quidditch pitch. Curses came in colors Harry didn't have names for, fast enough that dodging one meant flying directly into the path of the next, and he threw up shield charm after shield charm, backpedaling across churned mud, aware distantly of Ron and Hermione trying to flank and being cut off by masked wands, aware of McGonagall's voice somewhere far away throwing everything she had at the Death Eaters swarming the stands, aware that this was going wrong, badly wrong. Faster than anything had gone wrong in this entire war. "Run, Harry!" Hermione's scream, raw with a fear he'd never heard in her voice before, not even close. He didn't run. He'd never learned how, not really, not when it mattered. And later he would understand that this single stubborn refusal, this same old flaw that had nearly gotten him killed a dozen times before, was about to genuinely kill him, and that the universe apparently had a very specific, very cruel sense of irony about which of Harry's flaws it chose to punish, and which ones it would eventually, impossibly, reward. His heel caught a divot in the churned turf. He stumbled just half a step, just long enough for his shield to flicker. Voldemort's smile, that thin, satisfied, patient thing, was the last expression Harry Potter ever consciously registered as a normal boy. Avada Kedavra, there was no pain. That was the strange thing he'd remember later, in the moment before he stopped remembering anything at all. No burning, no tearing, nothing like the stories, nothing like the scar on his forehead had ever prepared him for. Just green light filling his whole field of vision, and then a kind of vast, total silence, the sound of the world simply switching off, and Harry Potter's heart, which had beaten steadily through 17 years of scars and losses and impossible survivals, stopped. He fell backward into the mud of the Quidditch pitch, and he did not get up. Hermione's scream tore through the pitch loud enough that even the fighting seemed to pause for half a second, and then she was running, throwing herself down in the churned mud beside him, hands pressed against his chest where there should have been a heartbeat and wasn't. No, Harry, no, please. Ron reached them a heartbeat later, dropping to his knees so hard he'd have bruises for a week, grabbing Harry's shoulders like he could shake him back into breathing. He's not, Hermione, tell me he's not. He's not breathing. Her voice had gone somewhere terrible and flat, the voice of someone reciting a fact so unbearable that saying it plainly was the only way to survive saying it at all. There's no pulse. There's no, his eyes are. Harry's eyes were open. Green, still unmistakably his own, but empty in a way that eyes only ever were empty once. Above them on the pitch, Voldemort had already turned away, unhurried, already reforming his lines, already speaking to his masked circle in a voice of pure satisfaction. 10 years, he said, to know one and every one. 10 years he escaped me through luck and old magic and a mother's foolish sacrifice, and in the end it took nothing more than a boy tripping over his own feet. Fall back. We're finished here. He didn't even look back at the body. That, more than anything, was the thing Ron would never forgive him for. That Voldemort killed Harry Potter and then simply left. The way you'd leave a room after switching off a light, as though the single most important death in the history of the wizarding world was a chore already checked off a list. The Death Eaters vanished into the dark sky the way they'd come, and the floodlights flickered back on one by one, and the Quidditch pitch that had been a battlefield 30 seconds earlier became, in the sudden ordinary glow of restored electric light, a place where 400 students could see with perfect, horrible clarity exactly what was lying in the mud at the 50-yard line. McGonagall reached them at a dead run, robes flying, and went white, genuinely, bloodlessly white, in a way none of her students had ever seen. Move, she said, voice cracking clean in half, and shoved Hermione and Ron aside with more force than either of them expected from her, dropping down to check for herself, fingers at his throat, at his wrist, pressing her ear flat against his chest. Nothing. Get Pomfrey, she said, and her voice had gone somewhere very far away and very controlled, the voice of a woman holding herself together through sheer discipline because falling apart wasn't an option yet, not yet. There might still be time. Now. Someone get Poppy Pomfrey to the pitch this instant, and someone else get Albus Dumbledore, and I'm here. Dumbledore's voice, and he was there, robes torn at one shoulder from wherever he'd been fighting elsewhere on the grounds, face unreadable in a way Harry, had he been conscious to see it, would have found more frightening than anything Voldemort had done that night. He knelt on Harry's other side, and his wand moved in slow, careful arcs above the still body, and whatever spell he cast made his own face go, for just a moment, terribly old. Albus. McGonagall's voice was barely a whisper now. Is he? Yes, Dumbledore said, just that. Just the single unbearable word. Ginny had landed her broom somewhere behind them and pushed through the crowd of staff and students that had gathered in a widening, horrified circle. And when she really saw, past the bodies of the teachers blocking her view, she made a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite anything human at all, and dropped to her knees in the mud beside Hermione, grabbing for Harry's hand like she could pull him back through sheer refusal. "He can't be," she said. "He can't be, he's Harry, he can't just, Miss Weasley." Dumbledore's voice, gentle even now, even with this. "I need you to move back just for a moment so that Madame Pomfrey can." Ginny didn't move. "I'm not letting go of him. You don't understand, I'm not." Madame Pomfrey arrived at a dead run, robes flapping, medical bag already open in her hands, and she took one look at the boy in the mud and her professional composure. 30 years of treating every horrific injury Hogwarts students could throw themselves into, cracked visibly down the middle. "Move," she said to Ginny, not unkindly, and Ginny let herself be pulled back only because Ron got an arm around her and held on. What followed was the strangest, most desperate 10 minutes any of them would ever live through. Pomfrey working with spells that had names none of the students recognized. Dumbledore's wand weaving alongside hers in patterns that seemed to bend the air itself. McGonagall on her knees pressing rhythmic pressure against Harry's chest between spells, because some ancient part of her medical training insisted that physical effort mattered even against magical death. 400 students standing in a silent, weeping, horrified crowd around the edges of the pitch, because nobody had the heart to make them leave and nobody, in that moment, had the authority to try. "Come on," Pomfrey muttered over and over, wand tracing desperate arcs. Come on, you stubborn, impossible boy, you have survived worse than this. You have survived things that should have killed 6 grown wizards. Come on, 3 minutes. The number would live in all of their memories forever, the specific, unbearable length of it. 3 minutes with no pulse, no breath, green eyes open and empty, and staring at nothing at all. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Madame Pomfrey's wand slipped from suddenly shaking fingers, and she sat back on her heels in the mud. And for the first time in living memory at Hogwarts, the school nurse had absolutely nothing left to try. "I'm sorry," she said to Dumbledore, to McGonagall, to the crowd of children who had loved this boy in 100 different ways for 6 long years. "I'm so sorry. There's nothing more I can." That was when Harry Potter's heart started beating again. It didn't happen gently. There was no soft flutter, no gradual return. His chest simply jumped, hard enough that Pomfrey actually flinched backward, and his back arched off the mud, and he drew in one enormous, ragged, gasping breath like a man surfacing from 20 feet underwater, and then he was coughing, choking, alive in the most violent, undeniable way a body could possibly be alive. For a full second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 400 students and half a dozen adults simply stared, utterly unable to process what they were seeing, as if their brains had already filed the boy in the mud under dead and needed physical time to unfile him. Then Ginny screamed his name and threw herself forward so hard she nearly knocked Pomfrey over doing it, and Ron was shouting something incoherent, and Hermione had both hands over her mouth and tears streaming down her face, and McGonagall, stern, unshakable, iron-spined Minerva McGonagall, put a hand over her own heart and simply sat down hard in the mud like her legs had given out entirely. Harry blinked up at a sky full of stars and floodlights and about a dozen faces he loved, all of them wrecked with something between terror and joy, and the first coherent thought that surfaced through the fog was, why is everyone crying? Harry. Ginny's face, inches from his, tears cutting tracks through mud she'd gotten on herself, falling to her knees. "Harry, can you hear me? Say something, please." His voice came out cracked, unfamiliar, like it hadn't been used in years instead of minutes. "What happened?" You died, Ron said, and his voice broke clean in half on the word. You died, mate. There wasn't a pulse for Hermione. How long was it? 3 minutes and 51 seconds, Hermione said, in the exact careful, precise voice of someone reciting a number because reciting it out loud was the only thing keeping her from completely dissolving. Nearly 4 minutes, Harry. You were gone for nearly 4 minutes. Harry sat up. It should have hurt. Everything about that sentence suggested it should hurt, should feel like waking from surgery, should feel like something. But instead he felt strange in a way that had nothing to do with pain at all. There was warmth under his skin, a low golden hum that seemed to be coming from somewhere behind his ribs and radiating outward. Not unpleasant, almost the opposite, like standing too close to a fire that couldn't burn him. I feel fine, he said, and it was true, and the strangeness of that truth hit him about half a second after he said it out loud. I feel really good. Is that weird? That's weird, isn't it? Madame Pomfrey, who had gone from despair to shock to something like clinical fascination in the space of about 10 seconds, was already running her wand over him in careful, methodical passes, muttering diagnostic incantations under her breath. Her frown deepened with every pass. Poppy. Dumbledore's voice was very quiet. What is it? There's nothing, Pomfrey said. Albus, there is nothing. No residual curse damage. No trauma to the cardiac or respiratory systems, and there should be, do you understand, even a successful revival from something like this should leave scarring, should leave weeks of recovery, and there is simply nothing. His body reads as though nothing happened to him at all, as though he never died in the first place. That's not possible, McGonagall said, still sitting in the mud, still visibly shaking. I heard the curse. I saw it hit him. There is no survivable version of the killing curse, Poppy. There never has been, not in the whole recorded history of. I'm aware of the historical record, Minerva. Pomfrey snapped, more sharply than she'd probably meant to, nerves stretched to breaking. I'm telling you what my wand is telling me, and my wand is telling me that this boy's body has no memory of having been harmed at all. Dumbledore had gone very still, the way he did sometimes, the specific stillness of a man turning over an idea too large and too old to say out loud yet. He looked down at Harry, really looked, in a way that felt different from every other time Dumbledore had ever looked at him, less like a headmaster checking on a student and more like a scholar encountering a page torn out of a book he'd thought he'd already read completely. Harry, he said gently, how do you feel, truly? Take your time. Harry considered the question honestly, because something about the golden warmth still humming under his ribs made honesty feel easy, almost inevitable. Strong, he said slowly. That sounds stupid, but that's the word. I feel strong, like nothing's wrong with me, like nothing could be wrong with me. He looked down at his own hands in the wand light, turning them over, and noticed, really noticed for the first time, the way his fingers weren't shaking. His whole life, every brush with death, every duel, every disaster had left some tremor behind, some adrenaline aftershock his body needed hours to work through. There was none of that now. His hands were as steady as stone. Get him inside, Pomfrey said, snapping back into professional briskness because it was the only defense she had left against the impossible thing sitting in front of her. All of you. Now, I want him in the infirmary. I want 100 more tests, and I want it done somewhere that isn't a Quidditch pitch in front of 400 witnesses. They half carried, half walked him back up to the castle, though Harry insisted twice that he could walk perfectly well on his own, and both times he was overruled by 4 separate people simultaneously. The crowd of students parted around them in a silence that had a texture to it Harry had never experienced before, not the ordinary awed murmuring that usually followed him through corridors, but something rower, closer to reverence and fear mixed together, the particular hush reserved for things people don't yet have language for. Ginny didn't let go of his hand the entire walk. Ron kept glancing over every few seconds like he expected Harry to vanish if he looked away too long. Hermione walked on his other side, reciting under her breath. Not incantations, Harry realized, but facts, historical precedents, the names of every documented instance of curse survival in wizarding history, cross-referencing out loud as a way of keeping her own mind from spiraling. There's no record, she was saying, mostly to herself. Not one. Not even Dumbledore, not even Grindelwald at the height of his power. There is no documented case in 1100 years of a human body surviving a direct, successful killing curse. Not partially, not with residual damage, completely. This isn't in any book, Harry, this isn't in any theory, Hermione. Harry's voice came out steadier than he expected. It's fine. It is not fine, you were dead. I know I was dead, I was there. A small, strange smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, and it surprised him how easily it came, how little fear was mixed into it. And now I'm not. So it worked out. Ron let out a sound that was half a laugh and half something closer to a sob. Only you, he said. Only bloody you would come back from being dead and immediately start making jokes about it. The infirmary, when they reached it, had been cleared of every other patient with a speed that suggested Pomfrey had sent word ahead. She got Harry onto a bed, drew the curtains, and spent the better part of the next hour running every diagnostic charm in her arsenal, while Dumbledore stood at the foot of the bed with his hands folded, and an expression Harry had genuinely never seen on him before, something between fascination and dread, held very carefully in balance. The results, when they came, were consistent in their impossibility. No curse residue, no trace of trauma anywhere in his body, past or present. His magical core, when measured, registered as roughly the same strength it had always been, but layered underneath it, coiled through his blood in a pattern Pomfrey's instruments had never been designed to read, was something else entirely. Something that wasn't magic at all, in any sense the tests understood magic. Something that read, according to one increasingly frustrated diagnostic charm, simply as alive and refusing to stop. I don't understand what I'm looking at, Pomfrey admitted finally, lowering her wand, exhaustion cutting deep lines into her face. I've treated curse wounds for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. It's not healing magic. It's not resistance magic. It's Albus. It's almost as though his body simply decided the curse didn't apply to him. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, studying Harry with an intensity that made Harry shift slightly on the bed, self-conscious in a way he hadn't felt in years. Harry, Dumbledore said finally, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer feels strange to say out loud. When the curse hit you in that last moment before everything went dark, did you feel anything unusual? Anything at all? Harry thought back. It was strange trying to remember dying. There was a kind of gap there, a held breath in the middle of his own memory, green light and then simply nothing, no sensation of pain or fear or even surprise. No, he said slowly. There wasn't anything, it didn't even hurt, it was just off, like a light switching off. And when you woke, there was, Harry hesitated because this part felt harder to put into ordinary words. There was heat, not burning. Just warm all through my chest, like something turning back on. And it didn't stop. It's still there now, actually. He pressed a hand flat against his own sternum, and under his palm he could feel it, faint but unmistakable, a low golden pulse that had nothing to do with his heartbeat and everything to do with some deeper rhythm he had no name for. Dumbledore's eyes flicked very briefly to McGonagall, and something passed between the two of them that none of the students in the room were meant to catch, though Hermione, sharp as ever, even wrung out with fear and relief, caught it anyway and filed it away for later. Professor, she said carefully, you've seen something like this before. It wasn't a question, and Dumbledore didn't pretend it was. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, His voice had the particular weight of a man choosing to share only the smallest, safest fraction of something much larger. "Once," he said, "a very long time ago. A rumor more than a witnessed fact, an old bloodline story, mostly dismissed as folklore even by wizarding standards, which is saying something. A trait that surfaces, extraordinarily rarely, in certain very old magical families. Not magic in the way we understand it. Something underneath the magic, something in the blood itself." He paused. "The old texts that mention it at all call it, rather dramatically, the undying blood. Modern scholarship has largely forgotten the term exists." "And you think that's what this is," Hermione said. "Not magical survival, something else, something biological." "I think," Dumbledore said carefully, "that I do not yet know enough to say anything with confidence, and that pretending otherwise would be a disservice to all of you, and dangerous besides. What I can say is that Harry survived something that should be, by every law of magic we understand, entirely unsurvivable, and that the manner of his survival does not resemble any known protective enchantment, ritual, or artifact. It resembles, instead, something native to him. Something that was already there, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Ron asked. "For him to need it badly enough, perhaps," Dumbledore said, "or simply for enough time to pass. I don't know, Mr. Weasley, I wish I did." The curtain rustled and Pomfrey stepped back in from checking on something at her desk, holding a small silver instrument that hummed faintly. "One more test," she said, "and then I want him to sleep, whatever he says about feeling fine. Harry, hold still." She pressed the instrument against his forearm, and it hummed louder, brighter. And then, with a small pop that made everyone in the room jump, the delicate silver casing simply cracked down the middle and went dark. Pomfrey stared at the broken device in her hand. "That instrument is goblin-forged," she said very quietly. "It has survived cursed artifacts. It has survived a basilisk venom sample. It does not simply break." "Maybe it's just old," Harry offered, and Ron, despite everything, despite the whole horrifying, impossible night, let out a startled laugh that he immediately tried to smother behind his hand. "This is not the moment for jokes, Mr. Potter," Pomfrey said, though there was something suspiciously close to relief in the sharpness of her tone. Relief, Harry realized, that he was still enough himself to be making jokes at all. They let him sleep eventually, though "let" wasn't quite the right word, since Ginny outright refused to leave the infirmary and Ron and Hermione weren't far behind in stubbornness. And Pomfrey, worn thin past the point of arguing, simply conjured 3 extra chairs and told them all to be quiet about it. Harry didn't dream, not exactly. There was a strange, warm dark behind his eyes, comfortable in a way sleep hadn't felt in years. None of the usual fragments of Voldemort's mind bleeding into his through the scar. None of the guilt-soaked nightmares about people he hadn't been able to save. Just warmth, low and golden and endless, like floating in something that had no bottom and didn't need one. He woke a few hours before dawn to find Ginny asleep in her chair with her head resting against the edge of his bed, one hand still loosely wrapped around his wrist, as though she'd fallen asleep mid-vigil and hadn't been willing to let go even unconscious. Ron was sprawled in the next chair, snoring softly. Hermione had a book open on her lap that she'd clearly fallen asleep reading, her wand light still glowing faintly at the tip. Harry lay there for a long moment just looking at them, and felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the strange golden warmth still humming under his ribs. Something simpler and older than that, something that had always been there. He was alive. He'd been dead, and now he wasn't, and these were the people who'd been there for both halves of that sentence. Carefully, so as not to wake anyone, he sat up. Nothing hurt. Not his back from the fall, not his chest from whatever violence had briefly stopped his heart, not even the old familiar ache behind his scar that had lived there for years. a low-grade hum of Voldemort's presence in the world that Harry had simply stopped noticing because it never went away. It wasn't there anymore. He sat very still, testing for it, the way you'd probe a missing tooth with your tongue, and found nothing. No pull, no whisper, no ghost of another mind's proximity. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his own head was entirely, completely his own. That's new, he thought, and the observation should probably have frightened him more than it did. But instead it just settled into place alongside everything else that had changed that night. One more strange new fact about the person he apparently now was. He swung his legs off the bed, careful not to disturb Ginny's hand still loosely curled around his wrist, and stood. The infirmary floor was cold stone under his bare feet, and he felt that clearly, cold, real, ordinary, which was somehow reassuring. Proof that whatever else had changed, the world itself hadn't stopped making sense entirely. Across the room, in the shadowed doorway that led to Pomfrey's office, he became aware of a figure watching him. Dumbledore, apparently having never left, seated in a chair pulled into the darkness where he could observe without disturbing. "You should be resting, Harry," Dumbledore said quietly, though there was no real reprimand in it. "I feel fine, sir. Better than fine." Harry flexed his hand, watching his own fingers in the dim light. "Actually, can I ask you something? And can you actually answer it instead of doing the thing where you look wise and change the subject?" The corner of Dumbledore's mouth twitched just slightly. "I will try. Am I in danger, like real danger, or is whatever this is going to keep me safe?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, weighing the question with the particular gravity he gave to things that mattered. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I want to tell you that whatever has awoken in you tonight makes you untouchable, and perhaps, against certain threats, it does. But I have lived a very long time, Harry, and I have learned that there is very rarely such a thing as true safety, only different shapes of danger, arriving from directions you didn't expect to look." "That's not exactly reassuring." "No," Dumbledore agreed, "but it is honest, and I think you would rather have honesty from me than comfort. Am I wrong?" Harry thought about it, thought about the golden warmth still glowing steady under his ribs, thought about the absence where the familiar ache of Voldemort's presence used to sit in his skull, thought about the fact that he had genuinely, clinically died on a Quidditch pitch less than 6 hours ago, and was standing here now feeling, if anything, better than he had in months. "No," he said, "you're not wrong." Outside, past the tall infirmary windows, the eastern sky had begun to lighten, the first thin gray edge of dawn creeping over the mountains beyond the lake. Somewhere out there, Harry knew, Voldemort was almost certainly hearing reports of what had happened, was almost certainly refusing to believe them, was almost certainly already planning to try again. Let him, Harry thought, and the thought arrived without a trace of the fear that should have accompanied it, arrived instead calm and clear and absolutely certain, a feeling entirely new to him and entirely, unmistakably his own. Let him try. Chapter 2. Skin like nothing by breakfast the next morning, the entire school knew. Harry hadn't expected secrecy. 400 witnesses on a Quidditch pitch didn't lend itself to secrecy, but he hadn't quite braced himself for what walking into the Great Hall would feel like. The moment he crossed the threshold, the buzz of 1,000 overlapping conversations simply stopped, like someone had thrown a silencing charm across the whole room, and then started up again twice as loud, twice as fast, every head turning to track him the length of the Gryffindor table. "Just keep walking," Hermione muttered beside him. "Don't look at anyone, sit down, eat toast, be boring." "I don't think I can be boring right now, Hermione." "You can try." He sat between Ron and Ginny, and the whispering didn't stop, not even a little, and he caught fragments of it drifting down the table. "He actually died, my cousin's a healer, and she said there's no way. She said even Dumbledore couldn't survive that. Someone said his skin's different now. Someone said you can't even cut him, and none of it was cruel exactly, just loud and hungry and a little bit frightened. The way people got when the story they'd built their whole worldview on suddenly had a hole punched straight through the middle of it. Voldemort couldn't be beaten. Voldemort could, however, apparently be survived. Those were two very different sentences, and the entire castle was busy discovering that difference in real time. Ginny reached under the table and found his hand without looking, laced her fingers through his like it was the easiest thing in the world, like the last 12 hours hadn't happened at all, and Harry found that the simple, ordinary weight of her hand in his did more to steady him than any of the staring did to unsteady him. "You look annoyingly fine," she said, buttering toast with her free hand like nothing was wrong. "It's a bit rude, honestly. I was up half the night worrying and you look like you slept 8 hours in a spa." "I feel like I slept 8 hours in a spa." "See, that's the rude part." Down the table, Seamus Finnegan was leaning across 2 seats to whisper something to Dean Thomas, both of them glancing at Harry every few words, and when Harry caught Seamus's eye the other boy actually flinched, like Harry might do something, like the boy he'd shared a dormitory with for 6 years had suddenly become something dangerous overnight. That stung more than Harry expected it to. "They're scared of me," he said quietly, mostly to Ron. Ron considered this with the particular bluntness that made him useful in moments like this. "Yeah," he said, "probably. You died, mate, and then you got up and started making jokes about it. I mean, if I'm honest, that's a bit terrifying even to me, and I've known you since we were 11. You're not scared of me. Course I'm not scared of you. You're rubbish at chess and you still can't pronounce Wingardium Leviosa properly under pressure. I've seen you at your absolute worst, mate. There's no room left for me to be scared of you." Ron grinned, but there was something underneath it, something Harry filed away without quite naming yet. "Doesn't mean everyone else has that going for them." Across the hall, at the staff table, McGonagall was watching him with an expression that hadn't fully recovered from the night before, and beside her, Dumbledore's chair sat empty. He'd been gone since before dawn, an emergency meeting with the Ministry, according to the whispers, though nobody seemed to know for certain, and Harry had a fairly strong guess about who else had received an urgent owl overnight. He was proven right about 2 hours later, when he was called out of herbology to Dumbledore's office, and found Kingsley Shacklebolt standing by the window, arms crossed, looking like a man who hadn't slept and wasn't going to for a while yet. "Harry," Kingsley's voice was warm, genuinely relieved, but there was a wariness threaded through it too, the same wariness Harry had felt radiating off half the Great Hall. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. Actually fine. Everyone keeps asking like they expect a different answer. Given the circumstances, most people would have a different answer." Kingsley glanced at Dumbledore, who was seated behind his desk with Fawkes dozing on a perch nearby, and something passed between the two men, a decision already half made, waiting only for Harry's input to finish making it. "The Ministry knows what happened. Fudge is fudge. He's more concerned with what it means for public panic than what it means for you, but Amelia Bones wants a full account, and frankly, so do I. I'll tell you whatever you want to know." "I appreciate that." Kingsley's dark eyes studied him with the careful focus of an Auror sizing up a variable he hadn't accounted for. "I have to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer, because how you answer might shape how the Ministry treats this going forward." "Do you feel any different, Harry, beyond the obvious?" He gestured vaguely, the closest he came to acknowledging the word dying out loud. "Any impulses, any changes in temperament, anger, or you're asking if I've turned into something dangerous?" Kingsley didn't flinch from it. "I'm asking if you've noticed anything you think we should know about. That's all." Harry considered lying, just for a second, considered smoothing this over, making himself smaller and safer sounding, the way 6 years of being underestimated and distrusted had trained him to do on instinct. Then he thought about the golden warmth still humming steady under his ribs, thought about the absence in his skull where the scar's ache used to live, and decided, quite deliberately, that he was done making himself smaller for anyone's comfort. "I feel stronger," he said plainly. "Not angrier, not different exactly, still me, still the same person I was yesterday, just more. Like whatever I had before, there's more of it now and it doesn't run out." He met Kingsley's eyes. "I'm not going to pretend that isn't true because it makes people nervous. I died last night. I'm allowed to have that change something." Kingsley held his gaze for a long moment and then, unexpectedly, something in his shoulders eased. "Good," he said. "I'd rather have the truth from you than a performance, even an uncomfortable one. There will be people, Harry, inside the ministry and out of it, who will want that truth to be more frightening than it is. There may be people who want it to be more convenient than it is, too, spinning you into some kind of weapon for the war effort. I would ask you to resist both of those temptations, coming from either direction." "I'm not a weapon," Harry said, and something in his own voice surprised him with how certain it was. "I'm not going to be anyone's weapon. I'll fight because I've always fought, because this war isn't finished and people I love are still in danger. But that's my choice, not an order, not a headline." Dumbledore, silent until now, allowed himself the smallest smile. "Well said," he murmured, and Kingsley nodded slowly, some tension leaving his posture that Harry hadn't fully registered was there until it left. "Then I'll tell the minister you're recovering, and that further details will follow once we understand more," Kingsley said. "Which is, notably, not a lie, since none of us understand a fraction of what happened to you yet. Speaking of which," Harry said, "I want to test it, properly. Not recklessly, I'm not going to go looking for Death Eaters to practice on, but I need to know what I actually am now, what I can and can't do. I can't walk around not knowing that." Dumbledore's expression grew thoughtful. "A reasonable request. Under supervision, I think, and away from the general student body until we have a clearer picture of the risks involved, to you and to others." "I've got people for that," Harry said, and thought of Ron and Hermione and Ginny already waiting for him outside, already braced to be dragged into whatever came next. "I trust them more than I'd trust anyone official, honestly. No offense." Kingsley laughed, a short, genuine sound that cut through some of the room's heaviness. "None taken. Frankly, I trust them more than half my department, too. They found an old, disused classroom on the 4th floor that afternoon, dusty, cobwebbed, full of broken desks nobody had bothered clearing out in a decade, and Hermione warded the door 6 different ways before she'd let anyone start, because, as she put it, "If we're about to find out you're bulletproof, Harry, the last thing we need is for some third year to wander in and see it happen." "Bulletproof," Ron repeated, testing the word. "Muggles have a good word for everything, don't they?" "Focus," Hermione said, pulling out a notebook she'd clearly prepared specifically for this, columns already ruled and labeled in her careful handwriting. "Pain response, curse resistance, physical durability, recovery time. We're doing this methodically, small tests first. If anything looks wrong, we stop immediately, understood?" "Understood," Harry said, though he suspected, even as he said it, that nothing was going to look wrong. "Ron, you first. Stinging hex. Nothing worse." Ron looked deeply uncomfortable with the assignment. "I don't love the idea of hexing my best mate on purpose." "You've hexed him plenty of times playing Quidditch." "That's different. That's an accident that happens to be my fault. This is deliberate." "Ron." Harry rolled up his sleeve, held out his forearm, entirely steady. "Do it." Ron sighed, raised his wand with visible reluctance, and cast the mildest stinging hex Harry had ever been on the receiving end of, the kind 3rd years practiced on each other in defense class. It struck Harry's forearm in a small burst of red light. Nothing happened. No welt rose. No sting registered at all, not even the faint prickling heat that usually followed the spell. Did you feel that? Hermione asked, already scribbling. No, Harry said, turning his arm over, examining perfectly unblemished skin. Nothing. Try something stronger. They escalated carefully, methodically, Hermione's careful notebook filling with observations that grew stranger with every entry. A full stinging hex, no reaction. A Jellylegs jinx deflected entirely as though it slid off him without ever taking hold. A proper cutting hex cast by Hermione herself with real intent behind it, the kind that should have opened a thin red line across his palm, simply failed to break the skin at all, the spell's energy dissipating against him like water against stone. That's not resistance, Hermione said slowly, staring at his unmarked palm. That's not even a shield effect, there's no visible barrier. It's like the spell just doesn't recognize you as something it can affect. Try a stronger one, Harry said. Something that would actually hurt a normal person. Ginny, who'd been quiet through most of this, leaning against a broken desk with her arms crossed, finally spoke. I don't like this. Ginny, no, I mean it, Harry. I get that you need to know. I do. But watching my brother and my best friend take turns cursing you while I stand here and just watch, that's not something I signed up to enjoy. You don't have to watch, Harry said gently. But I need to know what I am now. You understand that, right? I can't go back out into a war not knowing. Ginny was quiet for a moment, jaw tight, and then she pushed off the desk and crossed the room and took his face in both hands, searching his eyes like she was looking for something underneath the calm. If any of this hurts, she said, even a little, even in a way you think you can hide, you tell me, promise me that. I promise. She kissed him, quick and fierce, and then stepped back and drew her own wand. Fine, my turn. And I'm not doing a stinging hex, I'm doing something real, because if we're doing this, we're doing it properly. She raised her wand, expression set. Flipendo Maxima. The knockback jinx caught Harry square in the chest, a much stronger variant than anything they'd tried yet, one that should have sent him flying clean across the room and through the far wall besides. He didn't move. Not an inch. It was as though the spell struck an invisible mountain instead of a 17-year-old boy, the force of it simply arresting on contact and dissipating into nothing, leaving Harry standing exactly where he'd been standing, blinking, faintly surprised. The room went very quiet. Okay, Ron said eventually, in the tone of a man recalibrating an entire worldview in real time. Okay, that's not normal, mate. That's not even close to normal. Do it again, Harry said. They did it again. And again with variations, Hermione trying spells with genuine force behind them, Ron trying a full-body bind that failed to take hold at all, the incantation simply washing over Harry like it had never been cast. Nothing worked. Nothing so much as slowed him down. Try fire, Harry said finally, and Hermione's pen stopped mid-word. Harry, I don't think. Just a small one, please. Hermione hesitated, glanced at Ginny, who nodded once tightly and finally conjured a small controlled flame at the tip of her wand and directed it toward his outstretched hand. The flame licked across his palm and simply went out. Not deflected, not burned through some invisible shield. It touched his skin and extinguished instantly, like his hand had been doused in water it couldn't see. That's incredible, Hermione breathed, despite herself, scientific fascination momentarily overriding fear. It's not resistance to heat, it's like your body actively refuses to be damaged on some fundamental level. It's not a shield keeping harm out, Harry. It's something in you that harm simply cannot exist alongside. So I really can't be hurt, Harry said slowly, testing the shape of the sentence. I don't know that yet, Hermione said, careful as always to hold the line between observation and conclusion. We've tested spells. We haven't tested, I don't know, physical force, falling, suffocation. There might be limits we haven't found. Let's find them then. They spent the next hour finding them, and the results only deepened the strangeness. Ron, at Harry's insistence, punched him as hard as he could in the arm, Ron's knuckles came away bruised, Harry's arm came away entirely unmarked. They found the tallest window in the disused classroom, 3 stories up, and Harry, over 3 separate, increasingly frantic objections from everyone in the room, climbed out onto the ledge and simply let himself fall. He hit the courtyard flagstones hard enough that the sound of it echoed off the walls, and for one horrible second, watching from the window above, Ron's stomach dropped straight through the floor of the world, certain he just watched his best friend die a second time in as many days. Then Harry stood up, brushed himself off, and looked up at the window with a grin that was equal parts apologetic and delighted. "That was brilliant," he called up. "Sorry. That was probably a stupid thing to do without warning you, but that was brilliant. You absolute lunatic," Ron bellowed down at him, voice cracking with relief and fury in equal measure. "You could have, I thought, Harry, I swear to God." "I'm fine, Ron. That is not the point." By the time they made their way back down to him, Hermione's notebook had filled 3 full pages, and her expression had shifted from careful scientific detachment into something closer to genuine unease. "I need to research this properly," she said, closing the notebook with a snap. "Not just testing what you can survive, Harry. I mean actually researching in the library, in the restricted section if I have to, whatever old texts might mention something like this. Dumbledore said there was a name for it. The undying blood. If there's history, there might be, I don't know, limits, precedents. Something that tells us what happens next, because right now we're flying completely blind, and that terrifies me more than any of the tests we just ran." "You think there's a catch," Harry said. "I think," Hermione said carefully, "that magic and nature both tend to demand balance, and I have never once, in 6 years of studying this world, found a single example of unlimited power that didn't come with an unlimited cost attached somewhere. I just don't know yet what your cost is. And until I do, I'd rather we all stayed careful." Ginny slid her hand into Harry's again, quiet for a long moment. "For what it's worth," she said, "watching you fall off that ledge and get up like it was nothing was the single most terrifying and the single most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life, and I genuinely cannot decide which half of that feeling is winning." "Both," Harry said. "Let's go with both." 50 miles south, in a manor house whose gardens had gone to seed decades before its current owner ever set foot in it, Voldemort received the report from 3 separate sources within the same hour, and believed none of them. "Say it again," he said quietly to the trembling Death Eater kneeling before him, Rodolphus Lestrange, who had not personally witnessed the pitch but had heard it from 4 separate people who had, and who understood with grim, sinking clarity that being the messenger for this particular piece of news carried a very real risk of being killed for it. "My lord, the boy, Potter, he was struck by the killing curse directly, witnessed by dozens, and yet I know what you are about to say. I am asking you to consider, before you say it, whether you truly believe it, or whether you are simply repeating what frightened children told frightened parents in a moment of chaos and poor light." "I believe it, my lord, I'm sorry. I believe every word." Voldemort said nothing for a long time, seated in the high-backed chair at the head of the long dining table, red eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance that none of the assembled Death Eaters dared follow. Around the table, a dozen masked and unmasked faces held themselves very, very still, none of them willing to be the one whose movement drew that terrible attention toward themselves. Finally, Voldemort spoke, and his voice was calm in a way that was somehow far worse than rage would have been. "I have killed wizards more powerful than Harry Potter in every conceivable way," he said. "I have killed men who fought with more skill, with more experience, with darker knowledge of magic than that boy has ever touched. None of them survived my curse. Not one in 50 years, in hundreds of attempts across a lifetime dedicated to the study and mastery of death itself. And you are telling me that a 17-year-old child, standing exposed on an open field, simply got back up? Yes, my lord. Bellatrix. He didn't raise his voice, but the single word cut through the room like a blade drawn from its sheath. Bellatrix Lestrange rose from her seat with the eager, unsettling grace of a woman who had waited her whole life to be called on for exactly this kind of task. My lord, I want confirmation, not rumor, not the frightened testimony of children who saw green light and panicked in the dark. I want to see it with my own eyes, or with eyes I trust absolutely, and there is only one set of eyes in this room I trust that completely. He rose from his chair, robes whispering across the floor as he moved to the tall window overlooking the dead garden. Take a small party. Go to Hogsmeade. The students will be permitted a visit within the week. Security theater the ministry insists on to preserve the illusion of normalcy, and Potter, being Potter, will almost certainly be among them. Find him. Test him. If the reports are exaggeration, kill him properly this time and be done with the matter. If the reports are true. He paused, and something moved behind his red eyes that none of the assembled Death Eaters could quite name. Not fear. Not exactly. Voldemort had spent decades systematically removing fear from himself the way other men removed a splinter. But something adjacent to it. Some ancient and unwelcome caution surfacing from very deep water. If the reports are true, he finished, then do not engage him directly. Observe, learn what you can, and come back to me alive, because I suspect, Bellatrix, that this is about to become a considerably more interesting war than the one either of us has been fighting. The Hogsmeade trip was announced 3 days later, and half the school treated the news like an act of enormous bravery on Dumbledore's part, given everything, and the other half treated it like exactly the kind of reckless optimism that had nearly gotten 400 students killed on a Quidditch pitch a week earlier. It's a bad idea, Ron said flatly, over breakfast, watching the notice board where the sign-up sheet had appeared. Not that I don't want to go, obviously I want to go. I want a butter beer more than I've wanted anything in weeks. But it's a bad idea, and everyone knows it's a bad idea, and we're all going anyway because we're apparently allergic to learning lessons. Orders will be posted around the village the whole time, Hermione said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced either. Kingsley's overseeing it personally. Kingsley's one man. Kingsley's one man leading a team of 24, Ron. It's not exactly undefended. I'm just saying. Ron stabbed at his eggs with more force than the eggs strictly deserved. After last week, I'd have thought we'd all want to stay somewhere with actual walls for a while. Harry, who had been quiet through most of this, finally spoke. I want to go. Ron looked at him with an expression that mixed exasperation and something more complicated underneath it. Course you do. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. It's just, Ron set down his fork. It's just, a week ago, you'd have gone to Hogsmeade because you wanted a butter beer, same as the rest of us. And you'd have been careful about it because getting hurt was actually a thing that could happen to you. Now you want to go because some part of you is hoping something happens. Because you want to test it again in a real fight, not just Hermione's careful little classroom experiments. Harry opened his mouth to argue and then closed it again because Ron wasn't wrong and there wasn't much point pretending otherwise to the person who'd known him longest. Would that be so terrible? He asked instead, quietly. Wanting to know for sure, really sure, not classroom sure. No, Ron admitted. It wouldn't be terrible. It'd just be, Harry mate. I watched you die on a Quidditch pitch 4 days ago. I watched Hermione's hands shaking so bad she couldn't hold her wand steady for an hour afterward. I get that you feel invincible now, and maybe you are genuinely, maybe there's nothing left in this world that can actually hurt you anymore. But the rest of us aren't invincible. And watching you walk toward danger like it's nothing anymore, when it's still very much something to the rest of us. He stopped, jaw working. It's a strange thing to get used to, that's all. Harry looked at his best friend for a long moment, and understood with sudden clarity that this was a version of fear he hadn't accounted for. Not fear of him, exactly, and not fear for him either, but something in between. The particular ache of watching someone you love become something you can no longer fully protect or fully understand. "I'm still me, Ron," he said. "I'm not going to stop being careful about you lot just because I stopped needing to be careful about myself. If anything, I'm going to be more careful, because now I've got nothing else left to worry about except everyone else." Ron studied him for a moment, and then some of the tension went out of his shoulders, and he managed a lopsided, tired grin. "Yeah, all right, that's yeah. Just don't go looking for a fight on purpose, yeah. Let the fight find you, like it always bloody does anyway. Deal." The fight found them by mid-afternoon, in front of Honeyjuke's, in a way that would have seemed almost comically on schedule if it hadn't been genuinely terrifying for everyone involved except Harry. The first sign of trouble was the temperature. A sudden, unnatural drop that had nothing to do with the mild autumn weather, the kind of cold that arrived a half-second before Dementors usually did, except this time, when the black shapes dropped out of the low afternoon clouds over the village rooftops. They weren't Dementors at all. Death Eaters. Someone screamed, and the street erupted into the same chaotic scattering Harry had already lived through once that week. Students diving for cover, shopkeepers slamming doors, Aurors converging from 3 directions at once with wands already blazing. Bellatrix Lestrange landed in the middle of the village square with theatrical grace, dark hair wild, mad eyes sweeping the fleeing crowd until they found exactly what she'd come looking for. "There he is," she sang, delighted, mad, and gleeful in the way that made every Auror present tighten their grip on their wands. "Eichel Potter, alive after all, just like the little birdies said. My lord will be so pleased to know the truth." Bellatrix. Harry's wand was already out, and he noticed this himself distantly with a kind of clinical curiosity. His hand wasn't shaking, his pulse wasn't racing, the old familiar cold dread that used to flood him every single time he faced her simply wasn't there anymore. In its place was something calmer, harder, entirely new. "You want to check if it's true? Go ahead, check." Ron grabbed his arm. "Harry, it's fine, Ron, get people clear." Bellatrix's curse came fast and vicious, a cutting hex meant to open him from shoulder to hip, and Harry didn't even bother raising a shield. He simply let it hit him, watched it strike his chest and dissipate against his skin, exactly the way Hermione's spells had a few days earlier, and the resulting silence in the square, Bellatrix's own stunned, furious disbelief, the Auror's wide-eyed shock, the students peering out from behind overturned market stalls, was somehow more satisfying than any duel he'd ever fought. "That's not possible," Bellatrix breathed, and for one brief, glorious moment the mad confidence slipped entirely off her face, replaced by something raw and human and afraid. "Try again," Harry said. "Try harder." She did. She threw everything she had, curses that had killed skilled Aurors, curses forbidden in every civilized country in the world, curses that had made her name a byword for horror across 2 wars, and every single one of them struck Harry Potter and simply failed, dissolved against him like waves breaking against a cliff that had never once considered moving. He didn't fight back at first. He let her exhaust herself against him, watching with something that wasn't quite cruelty and wasn't quite mercy either, some new, cold clarity that hadn't existed in him a week ago. And when she finally staggered, breathing hard, wand hand trembling with something closer to terror than fury, he raised his own wand for the first time. Expelliarmus. The disarming charm hit her with far more force behind it than the simple spell usually carried, and she went flying backward off her feet, wand spinning from her grip, landing hard against the cobblestones outside the 3 broomsticks. For a moment, nobody moved. Bellatrix Lestrange, Voldemort's most loyal, most feared lieutenant, the woman who had tortured Neville Longbottom's parents into madness, who had murdered Sirius Black in front of Harry's own eyes, lay disarmed and shaking on the ground of Hogsmeade's main square, and Harry Potter stood over her with his wand raised and no fear left in him at all. "Tell him," Harry said quietly, and his voice carried across the whole silent square. "Tell Voldemort exactly what you saw. Tell him it's true. Tell him whatever he's planning next, it needs to be something better than curses, because curses don't work on me anymore." He paused. "And tell him I'm not scared of him, not anymore, not ever again." The remaining Death Eaters, seeing their commander disarmed and helpless, and the boy they'd come to kill, or confirm unkillable standing utterly unhurt above her, made the only reasonable choice available to them. They fled, gathering Bellatrix between them in a rush of black cloaks and vanishing back into the low clouds they'd dropped from, leaving behind a village square full of stunned students, relieved Aurors, and one 17-year-old boy who had just very publicly, very undeniably, stopped being afraid of the most dangerous woman in Britain. Kingsley reached him a moment later, wand still raised, breathing hard from the fight. "Harry, are you?" "I'm fine," Harry said, and for once, the words carried the full, unshakable weight of absolute truth. Behind him, in the ringing silence of the aftermath, he heard Hermione let out a breath that had clearly been held far too long, heard Ron mutter something reverent and profane in equal measure, and felt Ginny's hand find his own, gripping tight, not with fear this time, but with something closer to fierce, astonished pride. Word of what had happened in Hogsmeade would spread across Wizarding Britain within a day, would reach the desks of the Daily Prophet and the whispered conversations of the Wisengamot, and eventually would find its way, through channels far older and far more secretive than either the press or the government, to a man named Alaric Crow, who read the account twice, set down the letter with hands that had gone suddenly very still, and said, to the empty room around him, in a voice that had not shaken like that in 30 years, "Not again, not another one." Chapter 3, The Concordat. The house stood at the end of a lane in Wiltshire that didn't appear on any map, protected by wards so old they predated the Ministry of Magic itself. And inside it, in a study lined floor to ceiling with books that had been quietly removed from every major magical library in Britain over the course of 2 centuries, Alaric Crow sat with the Daily Prophet spread open on his desk, and did not move for a very long time. The headline was restrained, almost boring, exactly the kind of careful, sanitized nothing the ministry preferred when it couldn't decide whether a story was good news or catastrophe. Disturbance in Hogsmeade, no casualties reported, but underneath the careful ministry phrasing, in the actual body of the article, in the testimony of 11 separate witnesses, who'd all independently described the same impossible thing, was the sentence that had turned Crow's blood to ice water the moment he'd read it. Witnesses report that Mr. Potter sustained a direct and repeated series of attacks from known Death Eater Bellatrix Lestrange, including what several described as an unforgivable curse, without visible injury of any kind. Crow closed the paper very carefully, the way a man closes a door on a room he doesn't want to look inside of anymore, and sat with his hands flat on the desk, breathing slowly, deliberately, the way he'd trained himself to breathe 31 years ago in a burning village in the Scottish Highlands while his own brother stood in the middle of it, laughing, completely unharmed by anything the desperate Aurors surrounding him could throw. He was 17 when it happened, Crow thought, staring at nothing. Elias was 17 too. He rose from his desk and crossed to the tall bookshelf on the eastern wall, running his fingers along a row of spines until he found the one he wanted, a slim, unmarked volume bound in dark leather, its pages so brittle with age that he had to handle it with the exaggerated care of a man diffusing something. He carried it back to the desk and opened it to a page he had read so many times over 3 decades that the book fell open there naturally now. The spine creased permanently at that exact spot. On the undying blood and its terrible mercy the heading read, in faded, spidery handwriting that predated the printing press. Crow didn't need to read the passage again. He had it memorized down to the punctuation. But he read it anyway, because some part of him needed, every single time, to confirm that the words hadn't changed, that the warning was as absolute as he remembered it being. The bearer of this blood cannot be slain by curse, by blade, by poison, or by flame, and this is known to be true across every recorded instance where the trait has surfaced. What is less known and less spoken of, for those few who have witnessed it firsthand rarely survive long enough to record it properly, is that the bearer's invulnerability breeds, in time, a conviction that mercy and consequence are luxuries meant for lesser creatures. History records no case of the undying blood surfacing in a bearer who did not, eventually, come to see themselves as something above the laws that govern ordinary men. It is the considered opinion of this author that such bearers must be contained swiftly, before that conviction takes root, for once it does, nothing short of the specific countermeasure detailed in the following chapter will suffice to stop them. Crow closed the book and pressed his palm flat against the cover, as though he could hold 31-year-old grief shut inside it by sheer physical pressure. He remembered Elias at 17, exactly the way the boy in the newspaper article was being described, laughing, delighted, discovering an entire universe of consequence-free power all at once with the particular giddy recklessness of a teenager who'd never had to think about limits before. He remembered how it had started small and almost sweet, Elias showing off at family gatherings, letting cousins throw hexes at him for fun, everyone laughing along because it seemed harmless, seemed like a gift, seemed like exactly the kind of miracle a war-torn wizarding family might pray for. He remembered, less sweetly, how it had ended 3 years later, Elias standing in the middle of a burning village, 7 Aurors dead at his feet, laughing at the 8th as she tried, one last desperate time, to end something that could not be ended by anything she had. Crow had been the 9th. He had not laughed. He had not needed to end it in the end, because his brother had looked at him across the burning square and, for one single unbearable second, some fragment of the boy Elias used to be had surfaced through whatever the power had made of him, and he had simply stopped and let Crow do what needed doing. Crow had not slept a full night since. He picked up a quill, and on a fresh sheet of parchment in handwriting far steadier than his hands currently felt, he wrote a single line and sent it by raven, never owl. Ravens couldn't be traced by ministry post offices, to 11 addresses scattered across Britain, each one belonging to a man or woman who had spent decades preparing, quietly, patiently, for exactly this possibility. The Concordat convenes. Bring everything we built for Elias. We may finally need it. Harry didn't learn any of this, of course, not yet. He spent the days following Hogsmeade in the strange, giddy aftermath of having faced Bellatrix Lestrange without fear for the first time in his life, and the mood in the castle had shifted with him. Where the week before there had been whispered fear in the corridors, now there was something closer to awe, students no longer flinching when he passed but watching him with wide, hopeful eyes, as though his existence had rearranged some fundamental math about whether the war could actually be won. "It's a lot," Ginny admitted one evening, the two of them tucked into a quiet corner of the common room while the rest of the tower buzzed with homework and gossip around them. "Everyone looking at you like you're the answer to everything. That's a lot of weight to put on one person." "I noticed." "Does it bother you?" Harry considered the question honestly, the way he'd been trying to consider everything honestly lately, some new habit born out of the strange clarity that had come with dying and waking back up. A little, he admitted. Not because I can't handle it, I think I actually can now, which is its own strange feeling. But because it's not really me they're looking at. It's the thing that happened to me. If I hadn't died on that pitch, I'd just be Harry. Now I'm, I don't know, a symbol maybe, and I never asked to be one. Ginny was quiet for a moment, tracing a finger along the seam of his sleeve. For what it's worth, she said finally, I still just see Harry. The whole rest of the castle can go be dramatic about symbols if they want. I'll take the version of you that fell off a Quidditch pitch trying to catch a snitch when we were 14 and broke your wrist doing it. That's not a flattering memory to bring up right now. It's an accurate one. That's the point. She smiled, small and warm. I'm not scared of what you've become, Harry. I'm scared of everyone else deciding what you've become for you. That's different. He thought about that for a long time after she'd gone up to bed, sitting alone in front of the dying common room fire, and understood with a small ache that she'd put words to something he hadn't quite managed to name himself. Hermione, meanwhile, had all but disappeared into the library, emerging only for meals and classes, her research into the undying blood consuming every free hour she had. She'd exhausted the school's restricted section within 4 days and had begun writing letters, carefully worded, deliberately vague about the specifics, to contacts at the Ministry Archive, and to a research librarian in Egypt whom she'd befriended 2 summers earlier during a trip with her parents. I found something, she announced one evening, dropping into the seat across from Harry and Ron in the common room with a slim, ancient-looking book clutched against her chest like a shield. Finally. After 4 days of absolutely nothing but folklore and dead ends, I found an actual documented case. Go on then, Ron said, setting aside his charms essay with visible relief at the distraction. Hermione opened the book carefully to a page marked with a torn strip of parchment. It's fragmentary. Most of the direct records were apparently either destroyed or deliberately suppressed, which is its own worrying detail, but there's a cross-reference here in an old genealogical survey from the 1700s. A wizarding family in the Highlands. One son, surname redacted in this copy but I think I can track it down, exhibited what the text calls a resistance to harm beyond magical explanation, starting in his teenage years. The account describes him as, she checked the page, frowning slightly, unassailable by curse or blade and increasingly unmoved by the concerns of those around him, until his family and community judged him too dangerous to remain among them. What happened to him? Harry asked, and something in his own voice came out quieter than he meant it to. Hermione's expression didn't lighten. The record doesn't say directly. But there's a footnote added later by a different hand, decades after the original entry, that just says, contained at great cost. See Concordat Archive Restricted. The word hung in the air between the 3 of them. Concordat, Ron repeated slowly. It's a Concordat. I don't know, Hermione admitted, and the frustration in her voice was sharper than usual, the frustration of someone who genuinely hated not knowing things. I've never heard the term used anywhere else, not in any history I've studied, not in any ministry document. It's not in any index I have access to. Whatever it is, it's not something that wants to be found. That's not ominous at all, Ron muttered. Harry sat back, turning the fragment over in his mind. So there's been at least one other person like me. And whatever happened to him, it wasn't good. And there's some organization out there that specializes in dealing with people like whatever I am. That's the shape of it, yes, Hermione said. I don't want to jump to conclusions, Harry, I genuinely don't. There could be 100 explanations that aren't sinister at all. But I don't like the word contained. I don't like it applied to a person, and I especially don't like that it's applied to the only other documented case of exactly what happened to you. Harry was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire. If someone comes for me, he said finally, They're going to have a very difficult time containing anything. Harry. Hermione's voice had gone careful, the tone she used when she was about to say something she suspected he didn't want to hear. I know you can't be hurt. I've watched you prove it twice now in ways that terrified me both times. But being unhurtable and being uncontainable aren't automatically the same thing. If this Concordat has been preparing for someone like you for, what decades based on that footnote they might have thought of angles you haven't. Please, just be careful. I'm always careful, Harry said, and Ron, despite the gravity of the moment, actually snorted out loud. You climbed out a third-floor window on purpose 4 days ago. That was a controlled experiment. It was you being reckless with extra confidence behind it, is what it was. Harry opened his mouth to argue and then, looking at both their faces, Hermione's genuine worry, Ron's exasperated affection, found he didn't actually have the argument in him. Fine, he said instead. I'll be careful, whatever that means for someone who can't get hurt. The Concordat had existed, in one form or another, for nearly 200 years, not as a government body, never officially recognized by any ministry, but as something older and quieter and, in its own way, more durable. A network of old wizarding families and independent scholars united by a single shared conviction, passed down through generations like an inheritance nobody wanted, but everyone felt obligated to accept, that certain kinds of power were too dangerous to exist unmanaged in the world, and that when the ordinary institutions of magical government proved too slow, too political, or too naive to deal with such power appropriately, someone else had to be ready to act. They met that week in the same Wiltshire study where Crow had received his own terrible news. 11 people seated around a long table beneath a ceiling, painted with faded constellations that hadn't been fashionable in over a century. Most of them Harry would never learn the names of. A few he would come to know far too well. The reports from Hogsmeade are consistent, said a woman near the head of the table, Odell Fenwick, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, the Concordat's chief historian and the person who had, decades ago, helped Crow write the very footnote Hermione had discovered. Multiple independent witnesses, including 2 Aurors, direct exposure to an unforgivable curse, no injury, no visible defensive magic of any kind. It is not resistance, Alaric. It is exactly what the old texts describe. It is the undying blood awakened in full. I know what it is, Crow said quietly. I've known since the moment I read the first report from the Quidditch match. I'm not asking whether it's real. I'm asking what we're prepared to do about it. And I want everyone at this table to understand exactly what we're choosing before we choose it. A younger man near the far end of the table, Desmond Ake, the Concordat's youngest active member, recruited from the Auror office 8 years earlier after demonstrating an unusual talent for containment magic, leaned forward. We built the chalice for exactly this scenario, Director. It's been ready for 11 years. We should use it. The chalice was built to contain Elias, Crow said, and something in his voice made even Ake sit back slightly. It was built for a man who had already killed 7 Aurors and burned a village to the ground. Harry Potter has killed no one. He has, by every account I've received, used his gift purely in self-defense, in situations he did not create and could not avoid. There is a considerable moral difference between containing a monster and manufacturing one out of a frightened boy who has done nothing but survive. With respect, Director, Fenwick said, not unkindly, Elias didn't kill anyone in his first month with the gift either. You've told me that yourself more than once. It took 3 years for the power to curdle into what it became. We are not looking at a finished picture with Potter. We are looking at the very beginning of one, and the entire value of the Concordat's existence is that we act before the picture finishes, not after. The table was silent for a long moment, the weight of 31-year-old grief and 31-year-old policy sitting heavy between all of them. I don't disagree with the principle, Crow said finally. I disagree with the speed. Potter is 17. He is a public figure, beloved by half of magical Britain, actively engaged in resisting the single greatest threat this country has faced in a generation. If we move against him with force and it goes wrong, and gentlemen, ladies, I have seen exactly how badly these things can go wrong, we will not simply lose an operation. We may create the very monster we are trying to prevent. Fear does that. I watched it happen to my own brother. The moment the world started treating Elias like something to be hunted rather than someone to be helped, that was the moment something in him actually broke. So what do you propose? Abe asked, an edge of impatience in his voice that he was clearly trying, not entirely successfully, to keep respectful. Crow considered the question for a long moment, looking down at the ancient book still sitting closed on the table before him. Observation first, he said. Contact, if possible, careful, controlled, non-confrontational. I want to understand who this boy is before I decide what he might become. And if observation confirms what I fear, his jaw tightened, then we use what we built, all of it. Without hesitation, and without the mistake I watched the ministry make with my brother, which was waiting until it was already too late to act cleanly. And if he resists observation, Fenwick asked quietly, if he reacts to strangers approaching him the way any hunted 17-year-old boy who's already survived one war would react. Crow didn't have a good answer for that, and everyone at the table knew it, and the silence that followed carried the specific weight of a plan already beginning to go wrong before it had even started. The attempt came 8 days later, on a Saturday afternoon when Harry, Ron, and Hermione had taken the unusual step of visiting the ministry itself. Kingsley had requested Harry's presence at a debriefing about the Hogsmeade incident, one of an ongoing series of increasingly awkward meetings where various ministry officials tried to figure out, in careful bureaucratic language, exactly how much of a threat or asset the newly invincible boy, who lived twice, actually represented to official policy. They emerged from the meeting into the ministry's cavernous main atrium, a little after 4 in the afternoon, tired and mildly frustrated. Fudge's successor had asked variations of the same 3 questions for 2 straight hours without ever quite landing on a point. And Ron was in the middle of complaining loudly about it when 3 unremarkable-looking people in ministry-adjacent robes approached from different directions at once, closing in with a coordination that had nothing casual about it. Harry noticed it half a second before Hermione did, some new instinct alerting him to the deliberate geometry of the approach, 3 points converging on a single position that happened to be exactly where he was standing. Mr. Potter. The woman who spoke first was perhaps 50, silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, her voice pleasant and measured in a way that immediately set off every alarm bell Harry's war-trained instincts possessed. Forgive the intrusion. My name is Odolph Fenwick. I represent an organization that has some experience with situations like yours. We'd very much like a few minutes of your time, somewhere private. What kind of organization? Harry asked, not moving, very aware of Ron and Hermione shifting subtly closer on either side of him, wands not drawn but hands hovering near them. One that isn't affiliated with the ministry and isn't affiliated with the people you're currently fighting against, Fenwick said. One that would very much prefer to speak with you as a colleague rather than a subject, if you'll allow us the chance to demonstrate that in good faith. That's a lot of careful phrasing, Hermione observed, for someone claiming good faith. Fenwick's mouth twitched, something almost like respect flickering across her face. You're not wrong, Miss Granger, I apologize. Old habits from an organization that has spent a very long time being careful about how it speaks. I'm not going anywhere private with strangers, Harry said flatly. Especially not strangers who know my full name and my friend's full name and approach from 3 directions like they'd planned it. A fair position, Fenwick said, and something in her tone shifted, grew slightly heavier. Then let me be direct, since subtlety clearly isn't landing the way I'd hoped. We know what happened to you at Hogwarts. We know, in more detail than perhaps anyone outside your closest circle, exactly what that means, because this is not the first time in wizarding history that what you've become has surfaced in a person. We would like to help you understand it, before it becomes something you can't control. Something in her phrasing landed wrong, and Harry felt it immediately, not fear, not quite, but a cold, sharpening attention. The same instinct that used to keep him alive facing Death Eaters now redirecting itself toward this calm, careful woman and the two silent figures flanking her. Before it becomes something I can't control, Harry repeated slowly. You think I'm dangerous. I think, Fenwick said, choosing her words with visible care. That power without precedent is always dangerous, Mr. Potter, not because of malice, but because nobody, including you, yet knows its true shape or its true limits. I would like to help establish those limits before the world does it for you, in a manner far less gentle than this conversation. And if I say no to your gentle conversation, Fenwick's expression didn't change, but something in the air around them did, a subtle pressure, and Harry, scanning the atrium, saw 4 more figures he hadn't noticed before, positioned near the exits with the studied casualness of people who very much did not want to look like they were guarding anything. I would very much prefer that you didn't say no, Fenwick said quietly. Ron's wand was in his hand in an instant. That sounded like a threat. It wasn't meant as one, Mr. Weasley. It was meant as an honest hope. Yeah, well, it landed like a threat, so. Harry held up a hand, not taking his eyes off Fenwick. You said you have experience with situations like mine. That means there's been someone else. What happened to them? For the first time, something genuine cracked through Fenwick's composed exterior. Not fear exactly, but a real, weighted grief that hadn't fully healed even after however many years had passed. He died, she said quietly. Badly. After hurting a great many people who did not deserve it. And the man who eventually had to stop him has spent every day since wishing there had been another way. That is what my organization exists to find, Mr. Potter, the other way, before it's needed instead of after. The atrium had gone strangely quiet around them, the ordinary bustle of the ministry somehow muted, and Harry became aware, with the particular sharpened attention he developed over the past 2 weeks, that the quiet wasn't natural. Some kind of dampening charm, subtle, expertly cast, folding the little cluster of them away from casual notice. You're trying to isolate us, Hermione said sharply, catching it at the same moment. This whole area, no one's going to notice anything happening here, are they? A precaution, Fenwick said. Nothing more. I promise you, Miss Granger, our intent is conversation, not conflict. Funny how conversations that need this many precautions usually end up being conflicts anyway, Ron muttered. Harry weighed the situation with a calm he wouldn't have possessed 2 weeks earlier. No panic, no fear, just careful, deliberate assessment. 6 people that he could see, probably more he couldn't. A dampening field muffling the area. A woman who spoke with genuine, weary grief about someone who died badly, someone like him, and an organization old enough and careful enough to have prepared specifically for exactly this moment. I'll talk to you, he said finally. Here, in public, where my friends stay with me and nobody tries anything clever. He met Fenwick's eyes, steady, unafraid. That's the offer, take it or don't. Fenwick studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, not disappointment exactly, more like recognition of a decision already anticipated. I was rather hoping you'd say something like that, she said, with what almost sounded like genuine regret. It would have been simpler otherwise. Director Crow was quite insistent that we try the gentle approach first. There's a director. There is. Fenwick's hand moved, subtle, and Harry caught it a fraction of a second too late. A small vial already in motion, thrown not toward him but toward the ground between all of them, shattering on impact and releasing a thick, silvery mist that expanded far faster than any gas should have been physically capable of expanding. "Portkey trap!" Hermione shouted, but the mist was already around them, and Harry felt the unmistakable, stomach-lurching pull of forced transportation seize hold of all three of them at once, the atrium dissolving into a blur of gray and silver. They landed hard on stone flooring in a chamber none of them recognized, high-ceilinged, windowless, lit by torches that burned an unnatural pale blue, walls lined with runic carvings that pulsed faintly with old, patient magic. Ron hit the ground and rolled, wand already coming up. Hermione landed on her feet, shaken but steady, wand already tracing a rapid defensive pattern in the air. Harry landed standing, entirely unbothered by the impact, and looked around the chamber with cold, clear eyes. "Clever," he said to the empty air, because he was fairly certain someone was watching. A portkey trap in the middle of the ministry, past whatever security they've got. That took real planning. A voice answered from somewhere above them, a viewing gallery, Harry realized, set high in the chamber's curved wall, shadowed enough that he couldn't make out the speaker clearly. "It did," the voice said, and it was a man's voice, tired and heavy in a way that didn't match the ruthless efficiency of the trap itself. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, Mr. Potter. I truly am. My name is Alaric Crow, and I would very much have preferred we never needed to meet like this." "Let my friends go," Harry said, voice flat and hard. "Whatever this is about, it's about me. They shouldn't be here." "They came with you," Crow said. "That was their choice, and I respect it, even as I regret the position it's put them in. No harm will come to them, Mr. Potter. You have my word on that, for whatever my word is worth to you right now, which I imagine is very little." "Not much, no," Harry agreed, "considering you just kidnapped us out of the Ministry of Magic." "I did." Crow's voice carried something that sounded almost like shame. "Because I have spent 31 years preparing for a conversation I hoped I would never have to have again, and I am terrified, genuinely, deeply terrified, that if I don't have it now on my terms in a place I control, I will lose the chance to have it at all before events outpace both of us." Ron had found his feet, wand still raised, scanning the chamber for exits and finding none obvious. "Whatever you're afraid of," he called up toward the gallery. Harry's nodded. "He's not some monster you need to lock in a room. He's just a bloke who nearly died protecting a Quidditch pitch full of 11-year-olds. "I believe you, Mr. Weasley," Crow said, and there was real weight in it. "I want very badly to believe you, but belief isn't the same as certainty, and I have buried too many people to bet everything on belief alone." Hermione's eyes had been scanning the runic carvings along the walls, her mind clearly racing through everything she'd learned in the library that week. "This chamber," she said slowly, "it's not a prison. It's containment architecture. I've read about wards like this. They're designed to hold a target in place, not to hurt them. You're not trying to hurt Harry." "No," Crow agreed. "I don't think hurting him is even possible, Miss Granger, which is precisely the problem I've spent 3 decades trying to solve." The runes along the walls flared suddenly, a slow pulse of pale light spreading from carving to carving in a wave that circled the entire chamber, and Harry felt something shift in the air around him. Pressure, subtle but unmistakable, gathering tight around his body like an invisible net drawing slowly closed. "What is this?" Harry said, and for the first time since he'd woken up on that Quidditch pitch, something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it stirred in his chest. "A containment field," Crow said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very careful. "Built specifically, decades ago, to hold something that curses and blades cannot touch. I'm not going to hurt you, Mr. Potter. I give you my absolute word on that. But I need you held still, just for a little while, so that we can talk honestly without the risk of this conversation becoming something violent before either of us wants it to." The pressure tightened further, and Harry felt his feet root suddenly, painlessly but absolutely, to the stone floor beneath him, some ancient magic anchoring him in place with a certainty that had nothing to do with physical force at all. Ron and Hermione weren't caught in it. The field, whatever it was, had been built with surgical precision for exactly one target, and Ron let out a furious shout, already moving toward Harry, wand raised at the gallery above. "Let him go right now, or I swear, Ron, wait." Harry's voice cut through, steady, and everyone in the chamber, Ron, Hermione, even, judging by the sudden stillness above, Crow himself, seemed to pause at the calm certainty in it, because Harry had felt something in that moment of being anchored that he suspected Crow, watching from his careful gallery, hadn't accounted for at all. The pressure meant to hold him in place, ancient and cleverly built as it was, had found something in him that had no intention of staying held. The golden warmth under his ribs, the same warmth that had turned aside every curse Bellatrix Lestrange had thrown, the same warmth that had let him walk away from a 3-story fall without a scratch, surged now, slow and vast and entirely unhurried, and Harry felt the ancient runic containment straining against it like a dam straining against a rising tide, holding for now, but only for now. "Director Crow," Harry called up, voice absolutely level, no anger in it, just plain and simple certainty. "I understand you're scared. I understand you've lost someone, and I understand you built this whole room because you never wanted to feel that helpless again. I actually feel for you, believe it or not." He paused, and let the next words land with quiet, unshakable weight. "But this containment field of yours is starting to feel warm to the touch. I'd talk fast if I were you, because I don't think it's built to hold what's actually happening to it right now." There was a long, ringing silence from the gallery above. "Warm," Crow repeated slowly, and something in his voice had shifted from careful control into something close to genuine alarm. "Getting warmer," Harry confirmed. "I'd say you've got maybe 2 more minutes before this whole room finds out exactly how much it can't hold me." Chapter 4. What the Dark Lord Fears. The runes along the chamber walls were glowing white-hot now, and Alaric Crow, watching from the gallery above with his hands gripping the stone rail hard enough to hurt, understood with sick, plummeting certainty that his containment field, built over 11 years, tested against every theoretical model his organization possessed, funded with money and expertise that could have rebuilt half of Diagon Alley, was failing. Not slowly, not gracefully. It was failing the way a dam fails, holding perfectly right up until the exact moment it doesn't hold at all. "Director," Desmond Ape's voice came sharp and urgent from the chamber behind Crow, where he'd been monitoring the containment runes through a bank of enchanted instruments since the moment Harry had landed. "The output's spiking. I don't understand it. The field's rated for a sustained pressure 10 times anything Elias generated at his worst, and it's already at 40% capacity and climbing. Climbing how fast? Too fast. Director, if this doesn't level off in the next 90 seconds, I don't think we have a contingency for what happens next." Crow looked down into the chamber below, at the boy standing rooted to the stone floor by magic that had taken his life's work to build, and felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 31 years. Not fear exactly, though there was fear in it, but something closer to grief resurfacing, old and raw and terribly familiar. He remembered Elias standing in almost exactly this posture, once, years before the burning village, back when the Concordat's predecessors had first tried to contain him with an earlier, cruder version of this same magic. He remembered the exact look on his brother's face in the moment the containment failed, not triumph, not rage, but a terrible, dawning realization that nothing built by ordinary hands could hold him anymore, and that the world had just quietly, permanently, become something he no longer had to be afraid of. He was terrified of seeing that same realization dawn on Harry Potter's face. "Release him," Crow said. "Director, release him, Desmond, now, before I have to watch this go the way it went with my brother." Below in the chamber, the runes flared one final time and then went dark all at once, the pressure holding Harry's feet to the floor simply vanishing, and Harry rolled his shoulders once, testing the sudden absence of resistance with the mild curiosity of a man checking whether a door he'd expected to be locked had actually been left open the whole time. "There," he said, glancing up toward the gallery. "That's better." Ron let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for the better part of a minute. "Bloody hell, mate. I thought that room was about to. It wasn't going to hurt me, Ron. I told you it was warming up because it couldn't hold whatever this is. That's a different thing entirely." Harry looked back up toward the gallery, and something in his expression had shifted, not anger, though he'd have been entitled to plenty of it, but something more patient, more curious. "Director Crow, you can come down now. I think we're past the part where you need to hide behind glass." There was a long pause, and then footsteps, and a door Harry hadn't noticed set into the chamber's curved wall opened, and a man walked through it who looked nothing like what Harry had expected. He was perhaps 60, silver-haired, dressed in plain dark robes with none of the theatrical menace Harry had half-braced himself for. His face was lined with the specific, permanent exhaustion of a man who had spent decades carrying something heavy and had long since stopped expecting to be allowed to put it down. "Mr. Potter," Crow said, stopping a careful 10 feet away, hands visibly empty, no wand drawn. "I owe you an apology, and I owe your friends one considerably larger than that. What I did today it was born of fear, not malice, but I understand that distinction matters very little to the people on the receiving end of it. You kidnapped us from the Ministry of Magic," Hermione said, her voice tight with the specific fury of someone who'd been genuinely frightened and was now working through the aftermath of that fear. "You dosed us with some kind of portkey trap and dragged us into a room designed to hold Harry against his will. I don't care how sorry you are. That's not the kind of thing an apology fixes." "You're right," Crow said simply, and the lack of argument in it seemed to surprise Hermione more than any defense could have. "It doesn't fix anything. I'm not asking it to. I'm telling you because it's true, and because I would rather you hear the truth from me directly than continue believing I'm simply a villain in whatever story you're building about this afternoon. I would have preferred a conversation over tea. I chose fear instead, because fear is easier to plan around than hope, and I have had 31 years of practice planning around fear." Harry studied the man for a long moment, really studied him, the way he'd learned to study people during the war, looking past the words to whatever sat underneath them. There was no cruelty in Crow's face. There was exhaustion and grief, and a very specific kind of terror that Harry recognized instantly, because he'd seen something close to it on his own face in mirrors more times than he could count during the years Voldemort had haunted his every waking thought. "Tell me about your brother," Harry said quietly. Something moved across Crow's face, surprise first, and then something rower underneath it. "How do you know I had a brother? You said it yourself upstairs. And your organization built a room specifically designed to hold someone like me before I even existed, which means someone like me existed once before, and you talk about him the way people talk about family, not the way they talk about a case file." Harry paused. "I've buried people too, Director. I know what it sounds like when someone's still carrying it." Crow was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost every ounce of the careful, measured control he'd used from the gallery. "His name was Elias," he said. "My younger brother. He awakened the same gift you have when he was 17, exactly as you did, though not, thank whatever gods exist, through the same means. There was no curse, no death and revival, simply a fever that broke one night and left him different when it did. And for a while it was wonderful. He was invincible, and he was still Elias, still kind, still funny, still the boy who taught me to fly a broomstick when I was too scared to try it myself. He stopped, jaw tight. It took 3 years for that to change. Slowly, at first. He started taking risks he had no reason to take, because risk had stopped meaning anything to him. Then he started making decisions for other people, because he'd stopped believing anyone's judgment mattered as much as his own. After all, what did consequence mean to a man who couldn't be hurt by anything the world tried to throw back at him? And then, one terrible night in a village whose name I will not say out loud in this room, he decided that 7 Aurors trying to arrest a friend of his for a crime he didn't think was serious enough to warrant arrest were an obstacle rather than people, and he removed the obstacle. All 7 of them, without hesitation, and this is the part I have never been able to forgive, not fully, not even after 31 years, without much apparent regret afterward either. The chamber was very quiet. What happened to him? Ron asked, quieter now, some of his earlier fury dampened by the raw weight of the story. I killed him, Crow said, flat and simple, no drama in it at all, just fact laid bare. Not with a curse, nothing could touch him by then, we'd tried everything. There is exactly one countermeasure that works against the undying blood, one weapon in the entire world capable of ending what he'd become, and my organization's predecessors had spent decades building it in secret, hoping it would never be needed. I used it. I am the only person in 3 generations of my family who has ever had to make that choice, and I have made it once, and I promised myself, standing over what was left of my brother, that I would do everything in my power to make sure no one ever had to make that choice again, which meant, in my mind, catching the next person like him early. Before 3 years had passed, before the village burned. And you thought that was me, Harry said. Some kid barely 2 weeks into this who's used it exactly twice, both times to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I thought it might be you, Crow corrected quietly. I still don't know that it isn't. That's the honest, uncomfortable truth of it, Mr. Potter, and I would rather give you that honesty than false comfort. Elias didn't become what he became overnight either. It crept in, slowly, disguised as confidence, disguised as the reasonable belief that a man who cannot be harmed is entitled to make harder choices than other men. I have no way of knowing, sitting here today, whether you're different from him, or whether you're simply earlier in the same story. So what? You want to lock me in this room forever? Watch me like an animal in case I turn into something you have to kill? Crow's answer came fast, immediate, with more force than anything else he'd said. God, that's not, Mr. Potter. If I'd wanted to contain you permanently, I would have built this room to hold rather than merely restrain, and I would have brought considerably more force than I did today. I wanted a conversation. I wanted to look you in the eye and decide for myself whether you're a boy who happened to survive something extraordinary or something else entirely. I think, having now had that conversation, he paused, something in his face easing slightly. I think you're the former. I think I let 31-year-old grief make a decision today that my better judgment would have made very differently, and I am sorry for that genuinely, in a way I don't expect you to accept easily. Harry was quiet for a long moment, weighing the man in front of him, his grief, his fear, the terrible weight of a choice he'd had to make once and never wanted to make again. There was no part of Harry that wanted to hurt this man, even after everything, even after the kidnapping and the containment field and the vial of silvery mist thrown at his friends in the middle of the ministry atrium. There was only a kind of tired recognition, the specific exhausted understanding of 2 people who'd both lost too much to the same shape of horror, even if the horror had worn different faces for each of them. I'm not your brother, Harry said finally. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what I'll be in 3 years. Because nobody does. Not really. That's just what being 17 means, whether or not you've got a magic curse-proof body attached to it. But I know what I choose right now, today, and I choose to use this to protect people. Not to decide things for them. Not to stop caring what happens to the people around me just because nothing can happen to me anymore. He met Crow's eyes steadily. If that ever changes, if I ever become what your brother became, you have my word I won't fight you when you come to stop it. But I'd rather you spent your energy helping me figure out how to be careful with this, instead of spending it building rooms to trap me in. I think that's a better use of 31 years of expertise than fear is. Crow stared at him for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his tired eyes, and then, slowly, he extended a hand. I would like that very much, Mr. Potter, he said. More than I can easily say. Harry looked at the offered hand for a moment, and then shook it, and somewhere behind them, Ron let out a long, exhausted breath. And Hermione, always the last to fully let her guard down, always the one who kept receipts, said, in a voice that was only about half as sharp as it had been a few minutes earlier, "You're still returning us to the ministry through the front door, not another one of your portkey traps. I want that in writing before we leave this room." Crow actually smiled, small and tired but real. "That," he said, "I think I can manage." 50 miles away, in the manor house with the dead gardens, Voldemort received Bellatrix's report with a patience that unsettled her far more than his fury usually did. She had expected rage. She had, in a strange, twisted way, almost wanted it. Rage was familiar. Rage had rules. Rage could be survived by kneeling low enough and apologizing well enough. What she got instead was Voldemort seated at the long table with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, listening to every detail of her failed confrontation in Hogsmeade with the calm, focused attention of a man solving a very interesting problem. And when she finished speaking, he was quiet for a long time before he responded. "You confirmed it," he said finally. "Yes, my lord. Every curse. Cutting hexes, the cruciatus, she hesitated. The killing curse itself, my lord, cast directly, and it did nothing. Nothing at all. He simply stood there." "And how did that make you feel, Bellatrix? Being unable to touch a 17-year-old boy who has never once defeated you in single combat before?" The question was gentler than she expected, and somehow that made it worse. "Afraid, my lord," she admitted, because lying to him had never once worked and she'd stopped trying decades ago. "I have not been afraid of a duel in a very long time. I was afraid of that one." "Good," Voldemort said, and the word landed strangely in the room. "Fear is honest when it's pointed at the correct target. I would be considerably more concerned about you if you'd walked away from that field unafraid." He rose from his chair, moving toward the tall window with the slow, deliberate grace that had unsettled enemies for 50 years. "I have spent the last week considering the shape of this problem, and I believe I have been approaching it incorrectly from the very beginning. My lord, for 16 years, I have understood Harry Potter as a target," Voldemort said, gazing out at the dead garden. "A specific, singular obstacle standing between myself and the completion of everything I have built my life toward. My approach to obstacles has always been direct. Remove them quickly with overwhelming force before they can become anything more inconvenient than they already are. That approach worked adequately when the boy was simply talented and lucky. It does not work at all against a boy who cannot be removed by force, however overwhelming." He turned back to face her. "So I must change my understanding of the problem entirely. Potter is no longer a target. He is a condition, a permanent, unremovable feature of the world I intend to remake. The way weather is a condition, the way the tides are a condition. One does not defeat weather, Bellatrix. One works around it. You intend to leave him alive, my lord." There was no small amount of shock in her voice. "I intend to stop wasting resources trying to kill what cannot be killed," Voldemort said, and something in his tone had shifted into the particular cold, patient register that had always frightened her more than his anger ever had. "There is an old principle, dating back long before either of us, that every weapon which cannot be broken can still be turned. I do not need to kill Harry Potter to win this war. I need only to ensure that his invincibility becomes irrelevant to the outcome, and there are considerably more elegant ways to accomplish that than throwing curses at a boy who has already proven, twice now, in front of witnesses, that curses no longer interest him. What did you have in mind, my lord?" Voldemort was quiet for a long moment, red eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the dead garden, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone soft in a way that was, in its own patient and terrible way, far more frightening than any curse he'd ever cast. "He cannot be hurt," Voldemort said, "but everyone he loves still can be. A man who cannot suffer will simply learn to suffer through the people around him instead. That is not a weakness in my plan, Bellatrix. That is the entire foundation of it. Invincibility is a peculiar kind of curse when you think about it carefully. It removes fear for oneself entirely, yes, but it does nothing whatsoever to remove fear for others. If anything, I suspect it sharpens that fear considerably, because a man who has stopped worrying about his own death has nothing left to occupy that particular ancient corner of his mind except worrying about everyone else's." Bellatrix's mad eyes lit with sudden, dawning understanding. "The girl," she breathed. "The Weasley girl. Perhaps," Voldemort said. "Or the Weasley boy, or the Granger girl, or the entire Weasley family, or Dumbledore himself, or any of a dozen other threads that hold that boy's heart in place. I have not decided precisely where to pull first. But I intend to spend the coming weeks learning exactly who Harry Potter cannot bear to lose, and I intend to make him understand, in the most personal and unforgettable way possible, that his own invincibility changes absolutely nothing about how vulnerable the people around him remain. Let him survive every curse I throw at him for the rest of his life. It will mean nothing, in the end, if I simply make sure he survives them alone." The room had gone very cold, and Bellatrix, who had spent 30 years believing herself incapable of being unsettled by anything her master proposed, found herself unsettled anyway. Harry didn't learn about any of this, of course, not for some time. He returned from the ministry that evening exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with the strange emotional weight of Crow's story, and spent a long time that night sitting up in the common room with Ginny after everyone else had gone to bed, telling her the whole thing in careful, quiet detail. "He killed his own brother," Ginny said softly when Harry finished. "God, Harry, I don't even know what to say to that." "I keep thinking about it," Harry admitted. "Not the containment field or the kidnapping or any of the parts that should probably still make me angry, just the way he talked about Elias. Like he was still grieving someone who's been dead for 30 years. Like some part of him has never stopped waiting to see that exact same thing happen again. Do you think it will happen again, I mean, to you?" Harry considered the question honestly, the way he tried to consider everything honestly now. "I don't know," he said finally. "I want to say no, obviously. I don't feel like I'm turning into anything except more myself. But that's probably exactly what Elias would have said too, 3 years before that village burned. I don't think people notice themselves changing from the inside. I think it's the kind of thing you only see clearly from the outside, looking back." "Then I'll watch," Ginny said simply, and there was no hesitation in it at all. "That's my job now, apparently, watching you from the outside so you don't have to trust your own judgment about it alone." Harry looked at her for a long moment, something in his chest going warm and full in a way that had nothing to do with the strange golden heat still humming under his ribs. "You tell me," he said, "if you ever saw it starting, the thing Crow's afraid of." "I'd tell you," Ginny confirmed. "And then I'd probably hex you for good measure, invincible or not, just to make the point properly." He laughed, real and warm, and for a little while, sitting there with her in the dying firelight, the weight of everything, Crow's grief, Voldemort's silence, the strange golden fire that had rewritten his entire body 2 weeks earlier, felt manageable, felt almost like something he could actually carry. He had no idea, that night, how close Voldemort's attention had already drifted toward the girl sitting beside him. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later, in the most ordinary possible way. A letter, delivered by the Weasley family's aging owl, addressed to Ginny in her mother's handwriting, which was, on its own, nothing unusual at all. Molly Weasley wrote to her children constantly, worried and warm and full of instructions about eating properly and wearing warm socks, and Ginny had opened dozens of nearly identical letters over 6 years at Hogwarts without a second thought. This one she opened at breakfast, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary conversation with Harry about whether Gryffindor's next match against Slytherin would be rescheduled given everything that had happened at the last one, and Harry watched her face change mid-sentence, watched the color drain out of it, watched her hands go suddenly, terribly still around the parchment. "Ginny," she didn't answer right away. She was staring at the letter, reading it a second time, a third, as though rereading it might change what it said. "Ginny, what is it?" "It's not from Mum," Ginny said, and her voice had gone very quiet, very careful, the specific controlled quiet of someone holding themselves together by main force. "It's her handwriting. It's exactly her handwriting, but she didn't write this." Harry took the parchment from her shaking hand and read it himself, and felt something cold and absolute settle into his chest, not fear for himself. He'd genuinely forgotten what that felt like, but something far sharper and far worse, a fear entirely reserved now for other people, exactly as Crow had warned him it might become. "Ginny," the letter read, in handwriting so precisely forged it would have fooled anyone who hadn't grown up receiving letters from that exact hand for 16 years. "Your mother sleeps soundly tonight, and will continue to, provided her son and his friends make no further attempts to interfere with matters that no longer concern them. Tell Harry Potter that I have learned, at last, the correct question to ask about a man who cannot be hurt. The question is not what will you survive. The question is what will you watch? A friend." The great hall around them continued its ordinary morning chatter, oblivious, and Harry sat very still, reading the letter a second time, feeling the golden warmth under his ribs shift into something sharper, something with an edge to it he hadn't felt since before he died, not the calm, settled confidence of the last 2 weeks, but something older, colder, closer to the fury he'd carried through 6 years of war before any of this had happened to him at all. "He knows about your mum," Harry said quietly. "About all of you. He's not trying to hurt me anymore. He's telling me he's going to hurt everyone I love instead and just make me watch." Ron, sitting across from them, had gone pale, reading over Ginny's shoulder. "That's Mum's owl," he said, voice tight. "That's actually her owl, Harry, which means someone got close enough to our house to use it, or close enough to intercept a letter she actually sent and copy the parchment. We need to get to your parents," Harry said, already rising from the bench, every ounce of calm he'd carried since Crow's chamber gone cold and hard and focused. "Now, today, I don't care what class we're missing." Hermione was already on her feet too, wand in hand, mind visibly racing through contingencies. "McGonagall first. She needs to know, and she can get word to the Order faster than we can send an owl." "Harry," she caught his arm as he started moving, "I know what you're feeling right now. I can see it on your face, but you cannot go charging off to the burrow alone. If this is exactly what it looks like, That's precisely what he wants. He wants you reckless. He wants you making decisions out of fear for your friends instead of strategy. Harry stopped, breathing hard, that old cold fury warring against the strange new clarity that had lived in him since the Quidditch pitch, and forced himself, with real effort, to slow down. "You're right," he said finally. "You're right, but Hermione, he's not trying to kill me anymore. Do you understand what that means? He's given up on the direct approach entirely, which means he's going to come at everyone I love instead, one at a time, and I can't be everywhere at once, not even like this." "Then we don't let him choose the battlefield," Hermione said, already moving toward the staff table where McGonagall was rising from her own seat, drawn by the sudden tension radiating off their corner of the Gryffindor table. "We take this to Dumbledore. We take it to the Order. And we make sure every single person Voldemort might target is protected before he gets the chance to prove his threat is real. That's how we beat this, Harry. Not with your invincibility, with everyone else's safety." Ginny, still pale, still shaking slightly, folded the forged letter with careful, deliberate hands and tucked it into her pocket like evidence she intended to keep. "He's scared of you," she said quietly to Harry, and there was something fierce underneath the fear in her voice. "That's what this is. He's not the one holding all the power here anymore, and he knows it. And this is what a man like that does when the ground shifts out from under him. He goes looking for someone else's ground to stand on instead." "Then we don't give him any," Harry said, and the cold fury in his chest settled slowly into something harder and more useful, not calm exactly, but purposeful, the specific focus of a boy who had already died once and had absolutely no intention of losing anyone else while he still had breath left to prevent it. "Whatever he's planning, whoever he's planning it for, we get there first." McGonagall reached them a moment later, face already tight with concern at whatever she'd read in their expressions from across the hall, and the conversation that followed, hushed, urgent, spilling out of the great hall and into her office within minutes, would set in motion everything that followed over the next several weeks. Emergency wards raised around the Burrow before nightfall. The Order of the Phoenix called into full session for the first time in months. Kingsley Shacklebolt personally overseeing protective details for every remaining Weasley. For the Grangers. For anyone whose name might conceivably appear on whatever list Voldemort was currently compiling in that cold, patient mind of his. But none of it in the end would be quite fast enough, because Voldemort had learned something in the 2 weeks since the Quidditch pitch that Harry Potter had not yet fully learned about himself. That the boy's invincibility, whatever else it had done to him, had done absolutely nothing to slow the beating of his heart when it came to the people he loved, and that a heart which cannot be stopped by curses can still, given the right kind of patient, terrible pressure, be broken by grief instead. Chapter 5. The Second Battle of Hogwarts. The wards around the Burrow went up within 6 hours of the letter arriving. 3 concentric rings of protective enchantment stacked one over another by a team of Order members working in shifts through the night. Bill Weasley directing the goblin-forged perimeter charms, while Kingsley personally oversaw the ministry-grade detection wards layered on top. By dawn, the ramshackle old house looked exactly the same from the outside, crooked and patched, and leaning slightly to one side the way it always had. But anyone attempting to approach it with hostile intent would trip 6 separate alarms before they got within 100 yards of the garden gate. It wasn't enough. Harry knew it wasn't enough the moment he saw it, standing in the overgrown orchard behind the house with Ron beside him, watching Bill finish the last ward knot with hands that hadn't stopped moving in 18 hours. "He's not going to attack the Burrow directly," Harry said quietly. "That's not how he thinks. He doesn't throw force at something that's braced for force. He waits until you think you're safe, and then he finds the door nobody thought to lock." Ron didn't argue, because he'd learned over 6 years that Harry's instincts about Voldemort had a track record worth trusting even when he desperately wanted them to be wrong. So what do? We can't ward the whole world, mate. We don't try to, we ward the people. Harry watched Bill straighten up from the last knot, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold morning air. Everyone comes back to Hogwarts, all of you. Your mum and dad, Bill, Fleur, everyone. Dumbledore's already agreed the castle's the safest place in Britain right now, and it's the one place I can actually be close enough to do something if it comes to it. You really think he's coming for us specifically? I think he's coming for whoever's easiest to reach when he decides to move, Harry said. And I don't intend to let anyone find out the hard way which one of you that turns out to be. They moved the family that same afternoon, Molly weeping with fury and relief in equal measure, as she packed 6 years of accumulated household belongings into a single trunk with a speed that suggested decades of wartime practice. Arthur quiet and grim, in a way that didn't suit him at all. George making jokes that landed flatter than usual because everyone in the room understood, without needing to say it, exactly whose absence made every joke about the family's safety land wrong these days. Percy arrived within the hour, summoned by an owl from his mother that had apparently overridden years of stubborn estrangement in about 4 sentences. Charlie came the next morning from Romania, dragon-scarred and grim-faced, muttering the whole way about how he'd left one set of fire-breathing monsters only to come home to a considerably worse one. By the end of the week, the entire Weasley family, along with the Grangers, moved, at Hermione's tearful insistence, into a warded cottage near Hogsmeade under order protection despite having no magic of their own to contribute to their own defense, had been gathered inside or near the castle's ancient walls, and Hogwarts itself had quietly, without official announcement, become a fortress in every sense but name. Alaric Crow arrived on the 3rd day, alone, without the theatrical entrance of Portkey traps or silver mist this time, simply walking up the long drive from Hogsmeade on foot and requesting an audience with Dumbledore through entirely ordinary channels. Harry was present for the meeting, along with McGonagall and Kingsley, and watched with cautious interest as the man who tried to trap him in a containment chamber a week earlier laid out, with careful, methodical detail, everything the Concordat had learned about Voldemort's recent movements. We've had eyes on several known Death Eater properties for years, Crow explained, spreading a set of hand-drawn surveillance notes across Dumbledore's desk. Not for this war specifically. The Concordat exists to watch for signs of the undying blood surfacing anywhere in Britain, and dark organizations tend to attract exactly the kind of desperate, power-hungry recruits who sometimes carry latent traits like Mr. Potter's. In the course of that surveillance, we've noticed unusual activity. Increased movement, recruitment efforts specifically targeting individuals with certain rare bloodline markers. He paused. I believe he's searching for something, or someone, and I believe, given the timing, it relates directly to his failure to kill Mr. Potter through conventional means. He's looking for a countermeasure, Hermione said from her seat near the window where she'd been included in this meeting at her own considerable insistence. The same thing you already have, the weapon that can actually hurt Harry. Crow's expression tightened. That would be my fear, yes. How would he even know something like that exists? Kingsley asked. The Concordats kept this secret for 200 years, from what you've told us. That's not exactly the kind of thing that leaks. It leaks, Crow said grimly, when a man as old and as thorough as Voldemort has spent decades studying every corner of magical history that the rest of the world dismissed as folklore. I don't know for certain that he knows about the chalice specifically. But I know that a man obsessed with cheating death would find the concept of the undying blood irresistible to research. Once he understood that Mr. Potter's survival wasn't luck or old magic, but something with an actual name and an actual history behind it. And if he finds that history, headmaster, he will eventually find the footnotes. And the footnotes lead, however carefully we've tried to bury them, back to us. Dumbledore, who had been listening with his fingers steepled beneath his chin in a posture Harry recognized as his most serious thinking face, finally spoke. "Director Crow, this weapon of yours, the chalice you called it, where is it kept?" "Somewhere safe," Crow said. "I would rather not say more than that, even here, even now. Some secrets survive best by staying secrets. And if Voldemort finds it before you can prevent it," Crow's face went very still, "then Mr. Potter would face the single greatest threat of his life." He said quietly, "Because the chalice was built for exactly one purpose, and it does not fail at that purpose, regardless of who holds it." The room went very quiet. "Then bring it here," Harry said. Everyone turned to look at him. "Harry," Hermione started. "No, think about it. If it's the one thing that can actually hurt me, the safest place for it is somewhere I can watch it, not somewhere Voldemort might eventually dig it out of the ground on his own timeline while we're all sitting here hoping he doesn't find it first." Harry looked at Crow steadily. "You said your organization exists to be ready for exactly this kind of threat. So be ready. Bring it to Hogwarts, under guard, under wards stronger than anything Voldemort's ever broken through. If he wants it badly enough to come looking, better he comes looking somewhere we're prepared for him, instead of somewhere we're not." Crow studied him for a long moment, and something that looked almost like respect moved across his tired face. "You're offering to let me bring the one weapon capable of killing you into the same building where you sleep." "I'm offering to stop being afraid of a war I can't lose alone," Harry said. "This isn't just about me anymore." It stopped being about me the moment he sent that letter about Ginny's mum. If bringing the chalice here means we're better prepared for whatever he's planning, then bring it. I trust Dumbledore's wards more than I trust a hole in the ground somewhere that Voldemort's had a week's head start looking for. Dumbledore's eyes, when Harry glanced toward him, held something complicated, pride certainly, but also a deep and careful worry that Harry recognized, because he'd started to feel a version of it himself lately, the particular vertigo of watching your own confidence outpace your ability to fully account for every consequence of it. "I concur," Dumbledore said finally. "Bring it, Director Crow. Hogwarts has held worse secrets than this one, and kept them safe far longer than 200 years. The chalice arrived 3 nights later, transported under a security detail of 6 Concordat agents, and stored, at Dumbledore's direction, in a chamber deep beneath the castle that even most of the staff didn't know existed. A small stone room off the Chamber of Secrets' old access tunnels, warded with a density of protective enchantment that made the air itself feel thick when Harry stood near the entrance. He asked to see it exactly once, and Crow, after a long hesitation, agreed. It was smaller than Harry had expected, a plain silver cup, unremarkable except for a faint, cold shimmer along its rim that seemed to bend the torchlight around it in ways that made his eyes want to slide away from looking directly at it. There was nothing dramatic about it. No dark runes, no ominous glow. It looked like something you might find gathering dust in a museum, forgettable and small, and Harry understood, looking at it, exactly why that quiet unremarkableness made it so much more dangerous than anything flashy could have been. "How does it work?" he asked. Crow hesitated for a long moment before answering. "It doesn't attack the body," he said finally. "It attacks the trait itself, whatever ancient magic runs beneath the ordinary magic in your blood, the thing that makes curses slide off you like water. A single drop from the chalice introduced directly into the bloodstream unravels that trait permanently. Not temporarily, not with a counter-curse waiting on the other side. Permanently and completely, the way a fire permanently unravels paper." He looked at Harry steadily. "It doesn't kill the bearer of the undying blood directly, Mr. Potter. It simply makes them ordinary again, all at once, usually in the middle of whatever crisis made using it necessary in the first place. So if Voldemort got his hands on this, Harry said slowly, and got even a drop of it into me, you would become an ordinary 17-year-old boy standing in front of the most dangerous dark wizard in a century. Crow finished quietly, with whatever curse he'd already been in the middle of casting at the time landing exactly as intended, with no invincibility left to save you from it. Harry looked at the small silver cup for a long moment, feeling something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with fear for himself, and everything to do with sudden, sharpened clarity about exactly how much this war had just changed shape. Then we make sure he never gets close to it, he said. That, Crow said grimly, is precisely my intention. Though I will confess, Mr. Potter, that intentions and outcomes have not always aligned as neatly as I'd like, in my experience with this particular family heirloom. Voldemort had, in fact, already learned of the chalice's existence, not through the Concordat's carefully guarded secrecy, which had held for 200 years against considerably more determined efforts than his, but through a source far older and far more thorough than any spy network. The same crumbling, half-forgotten texts Hermione had spent weeks tracking down in fragments, texts that Voldemort, with 50 years and a considerably less scrupulous conscience to work with, had assembled far more completely, in a private library beneath Malfoy Manor that had once belonged to a family with a habit of collecting exactly the kind of dark, dangerous knowledge polite society preferred to forget existed. He had known about the chalice for 11 days by the time Crow transported it to Hogwarts. He had spent those 11 days, patiently, methodically, tracing every thread of the Concordat's operations back toward its likely resting place, and he had felt something close to genuine delight, a rare enough sensation for him these days, when his sources confirmed that the weapon had, quite conveniently, just been delivered directly into the one place he'd already been planning to attack regardless. They've made this easy for us, he told his assembled Death Eaters, 3 nights before the battle that would come to be called, in the hushed retellings that followed, the Second Battle of Hogwarts. The boy's invincibility and the one weapon in Britain capable of ending it, gathered together under a single roof, guarded by an old man's pride and a school's crumbling reputation for safety. We will not need to search for our advantage any longer. We need only take it. A direct assault on the castle, my lord, Lucius Malfoy asked, careful, calculating as always. Hogwarts has withstood sieges before. Hogwarts has withstood sieges by armies expecting a fair fight, Voldemort said. I do not intend to give them one. His red eyes swept the assembled circle, cold and patient. We will not attack the front gates like fools rushing to their deaths against ancient wards. We will draw them out, force Dumbledore's precious defenders to spread thin across multiple threats at once, and in the confusion, a small, specific team will go for the chalice directly, retrieve it, and bring it to me. One drop, delivered by any means necessary at any point during the chaos, and Harry Potter becomes, once again, simply a boy. And a boy, however talented, however brave, is something I have killed a great many times before. The attack came on a moonless night in late November, and it came exactly the way Voldemort had described it, not as a single overwhelming force at the front gates, but as 3 separate, coordinated strikes designed to fracture the castle's defenses into pieces too thin to hold anywhere fully. The first strike hit the Hogsmeade cottage where the Grangers had been sheltering, a diversionary force of a dozen Death Eaters descending on the village with enough noise and destruction to guarantee every available Order member and Auror would scramble toward it immediately. The second struck the castle's eastern boundary, where the Forbidden Forest's edge met the school's outer wards, A smaller, quieter force testing the ancient boundary magic with slow, patient probing spells designed to look, from a distance, like a serious breach attempt. The third strike, the real one, came through the tunnels. Harry was in the great hall when the alarm bells first rang, half finished with a late dinner alongside Ron, Hermione, and Ginny, and the sound of them, deep, resonant, ancient enchantment tied directly into the castle's own stones, brought every head in the room up at once, forks and conversation abandoned mid-motion. "That's the outer boundary alarm," Hermione said, already on her feet. The forest sighed. "And that one," Ron added, as a second, sharper bell began ringing somewhere beneath the first. "Sounds like Hogsmeade." McGonagall was moving before either finished speaking, calling instructions across the hall with the crisp, practiced authority of a woman who had drilled for exactly this scenario more times than she could count. "Prefects, get the younger years to the dormitories and seal them. Aurors, with me to the forest boundary. Someone get word to Kingsley that Hogsmeade needs immediate support." Harry was already moving toward the door, Ginny's hand caught in his, Ron and Hermione a step behind. But Dumbledore's voice cut across the chaos before he'd made it 3 steps, calm and clear even amid the ringing bells. "Harry, a moment." Harry turned back and found the headmaster's face set in the particular grave expression he reserved for the moments that mattered most. 2 attacks, at nearly the same instant on opposite sides of the grounds, Dumbledore said quietly. "That is not carelessness, Harry. That is design. Voldemort wants our attention pulled in 2 directions at once, and I do not think either of those directions is where he actually intends to strike." Understanding hit Harry like cold water. "The chalice." "I believe so, which means someone needs to be exactly where the enemy least expects us to be watching, rather than where the bells are currently telling us to look." Dumbledore's eyes flicked toward Crow, who had appeared in the hall's side entrance at some point during the chaos, already grim-faced, clearly having reached the same conclusion at the same moment. "Director, how many of your people are stationed at the chamber?" 4, Crow said. "It should be more than sufficient against ordinary intruders. Voldemort has never sent ordinary intruders anywhere in his life," Harry said, already turning back toward the doors, toward the passage that led down through the castle's oldest bones toward the hidden chamber. "Ginny, Ron, Hermione, not a chance you're leaving us behind," Ginny said, wand already drawn, jaw set in the exact stubborn line that told Harry arguing would waste precious time he didn't have. "Then let's move." The tunnel beneath the castle was cold and close, lit only by the pale flicker of their wand lights bouncing off ancient, water-stained stone, and Harry led the way at a dead run with Crow close behind him, both moving faster than the 2 Concordat agents who'd been assigned to accompany them could quite match, and Ron, Hermione, and Ginny trailing tight behind, wands drawn, breath echoing sharp in the narrow passage. They heard the fighting before they saw it, the distinctive crack and flash of spellfire, muffled screams cut short, the particular acoustic signature of a small, brutal battle already well underway in the confined space ahead. Harry didn't slow down. If anything, he ran faster. Some old instinct from 6 years of racing toward exactly this kind of danger overriding every ounce of caution that might otherwise have told him to wait for backup, to assess, to plan. He burst into the chamber to find 2 of Crow's agents already down, unconscious or worse, and Bellatrix Lestrange standing over the small silver cup on its stone pedestal with an expression of savage, triumphant delight, her wand already lowered toward it, mid-incantation. "No," Crow's voice raw with horror, but he was still 10 steps behind, and Harry was closer. And Harry didn't think, didn't plan, simply moved with the speed and certainty of a boy who had learned, over the last 3 weeks, that his body could do things no ordinary body could do. He crossed the distance between the tunnel entrance and the pedestal in under 2 seconds, faster than Bellatrix's spell could finish forming, and slammed into her at full speed, knocking her sideways just as the incantation left her lips. The spell, some kind of retrieval charm meant to lift the chalice cleanly off its pedestal, striking the stone wall instead and scattering harmlessly into sparks. They hit the ground together, hard, rolling across ancient flagstones, and Bellatrix came up snarling, wand already swinging back toward him, and Harry, for the first time since the Quidditch pitch, felt something close to real, sharp urgency, not for himself, never for himself anymore, but for the small silver cup sitting on its pedestal 6 feet away, and for what it would mean if it ended up in the wrong hands even for a single second. "Get it," he shouted to anyone, to everyone. "Get the chalice clear now." Crow was already moving, diving past the fighting toward the pedestal, and Bellatrix, seeing him go, screamed something furious and threw a curse in his direction that Harry intercepted without thinking, stepping directly into its path, letting it strike his chest and dissolve uselessly against him the way every curse had for weeks now. "You're not the only one who came prepared, little boy," Bellatrix hissed, and there was something different in her voice this time, something colder and more certain than the mad fury she usually fought with, and Harry understood, half a second too late, exactly what that meant. She wasn't alone. The second team came through a side passage Harry hadn't even known existed, 3 more Death Eaters, and at their center, moving with terrible, patient grace, robes trailing across stone that seemed to grow colder wherever he stepped, Voldemort himself. "Hello, Harry," he said, and his voice filled the small chamber the way it always had, vast and cold and utterly certain of itself. "I did wonder whether you'd come running the moment the bells started ringing. You really are remarkably predictable, for someone who's supposedly become something extraordinary. Get away from him." Ginny's voice, fierce from the tunnel entrance where she'd just caught up, wand already raised, and Harry felt something in his chest lurch hard and sharp, not fear for himself, but the old, familiar, terrible fear for someone he loved, standing far too close to Voldemort for his liking. "Ah," Voldemort said, and his red eyes moved toward her with slow, deliberate interest. "Miss Weasley, how convenient. I've been meaning to have a word with you." "Don't," Harry said, and the word came out low and hard, all traces of playful confidence gone from his voice entirely. "Whatever you're planning, whatever game you think you're playing tonight, leave her out of it." "I would love nothing more," Voldemort said, almost pleasantly. "But you've made that considerably more difficult, Harry, by making yourself so thoroughly impossible to threaten directly. A man adapts to the tools available to him. Tonight, that tool happens to be standing rather close to your girlfriend." Crow, meanwhile, had reached the pedestal and swept the chalice up into a warded case he'd produced from inside his robes, and the moment the silver cup vanished from the pedestal, something in the room's balance shifted. Voldemort's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and cold, calculating a new angle. "Director Crow," Voldemort said, "I confess, I hadn't expected the Concordat to make my evening quite this convenient, bringing your family's little heirloom directly to me rather than making me hunt for it. Hand it over, and I promise you a considerably faster death than the one your organization has clearly been dreading for 200 years. "You won't get within 10 feet of it," Crow said, and his voice, despite everything, despite 31 years of grief and fear finally standing in the same room as the thing he'd built his whole life around preventing, was steady. "I built the wards on that case myself. It would take a small army and considerably more time than you have tonight." "Time," Voldemort said thoughtfully, "is precisely the resource I have the least concern about wasting." His wand moved, almost casually, toward Ginny. "Crucio." Harry moved faster than thought, faster than he'd ever moved in his life, crossing the space between himself and Ginny in a blur that left even Bellatrix's mad eyes wide with shock, and the curse struck him instead, struck him square in the chest, having deliberately placed himself directly between Voldemort's wand and the girl he loved, and it did absolutely nothing at all, dissolving against his invincible skin like every other curse before it, leaving him standing there, breathing hard. Utterly unhurt, utterly furious. "Try someone your own size," Harry said, voice shaking now, not with fear but with a rage that had been building for weeks, ever since a forged letter had arrived at breakfast promising exactly this kind of terrible, patient cruelty. "Or better yet, try me directly, since apparently that's still the only fight you actually know how to have." "I am trying you directly," Voldemort said, and something in his tone had gone soft and terrible in a way that made the whole chamber feel colder. "I am simply doing it through the people you cannot bear to lose because that, Harry, is the only wound left that actually works on you. You've made yourself unkillable. Congratulations. You have not made yourself unbreakable, and I intend to spend as long as necessary proving the difference to you, one person at a time, until you understand exactly how little your invincibility has actually purchased you." Ron's wand was already up, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at him to run, and Hermione beside him, both of them refusing, with the same stubborn loyalty that had defined every year of their friendship with Harry, to let this become a fight he faced with fewer people standing beside him than he needed. "You want to threaten someone," Ron said, voice tight but steady. "You're going to have to get through the rest of us first, and we've got a bit more practice standing up to you lot than you might remember." Voldemort's gaze flicked toward him, faintly amused. "Loyalty," he said. "Such a fragile, expensive thing to build a war around. Very well." He raised his wand again, and this time it wasn't aimed at Ginny, or at Ron, or at any single person at all. It was aimed at the ceiling of the chamber, and the incantation that followed was one none of them recognized, ancient and guttural, and the stone above them groaned, deep and terrible, cracks spidering outward from the point of impact. "He's bringing the tunnel down," Hermione shouted, already grabbing for Ron's arm. Everyone move now. The chamber dissolved into chaos, stone falling in great choking clouds of dust, Bellatrix and the other Death Eaters using the confusion to press their attack, Crow fighting to shield the warded case containing the chalice with everything he had, Harry throwing himself bodily in front of falling rubble that would have crushed Ginny and Hermione both, letting it shatter uselessly against his back, while he shouted for everyone to get toward the far passage. In the chaos, in the choking dust and falling stone and screaming spellfare, Voldemort did exactly what he'd come to do, and did it with the same cold, patient efficiency he brought to everything. He simply reached out, through the confusion, and closed his hand around Ginny Weasley's wrist. "No," Harry's voice, raw and desperate, but he was too far. Buried under a section of collapsing ceiling he'd thrown himself under to save Hermione, and by the time he'd thrown the rubble off and turned, wand already rising, Voldemort was already gone, vanished in a swirl of black robes and terrible, satisfied silence, taking Ginny Weasley with him into the dark. The chamber went quiet, save for settling dust, and the ragged, horrified breathing of everyone left behind. "G-I-N-N-Y!" Harry's scream tore through the settling dust, raw and broken in a way none of them had ever heard from him before, not even on the night he died, because dying, it turned out, hadn't frightened him nearly as much as this. Ron was on his feet immediately, face white, wand still raised toward the empty space where his sister had been standing 30 seconds earlier. "He's got her," he said, voice cracking. "Harry, he's got her, we have to." "I know." Harry's voice had gone somewhere cold and terrible, the golden warmth under his ribs surging with something that felt, for the first time since he'd woken up in the infirmary weeks ago, less like calm confidence and more like a wildfire straining against every wall built to hold it. "I know, Ron. We're getting her back." Crow, still clutching the warded case containing the chalice, stared at the space where Voldemort had vanished with an expression of dawning, sick understanding. "He didn't come for the weapon at all," he said quietly. "Not really. This whole attack, it was never really about the chalice." "What are you talking about?" Hermione demanded, voice tight with fear and fury in equal measure. "He tried to take it. He sent Bellatrix specifically for it." "As a secondary objective, yes," Crow said, and something in his voice carried the particular horror of a man watching a strategy he'd failed to anticipate reveal itself a full step too late to stop. "But think about the timing, Miss Granger. 2 diversions, pulling every available fighter to opposite corners of the grounds. A team sent for the weapon that would strip Mr. Potter of his invincibility. And beneath all of it, in the chaos both of those things guaranteed, a clear, undefended path to exactly the one person Voldemort had already identified, weeks ago, as the wound that would actually hurt." He looked up, meeting Harry's eyes, grim and certain. "The chalice was never the primary goal tonight, Mr. Potter. It was bait. He used it to guarantee we'd bring you running here, to this exact tunnel at this exact moment, because he needed you distracted, fighting on 2 fronts, exactly long enough to take her cleanly." The chamber was silent, dust still settling, and Harry stood very still amid the wreckage, feeling something in his chest that no curse had ever managed to touch finally, terribly break. "Then we stop guessing what he wants," Harry said, and his voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but harder too, stripped of every ounce of the calm, playful confidence he'd carried since the Quidditch pitch. "We find out exactly where he's taken her. And then we go get her back, and I promise you, I promise all of you, that whatever's left of his patience with pretending this is a war of ideas instead of a war of blood is about to run out completely." Chapter 6. The Boy Who Stayed. They found Ginny's location within 4 hours, and it was Crow, of all people, who found it, not through magic, but through the same patient, methodical intelligence work his organization had spent 2 centuries perfecting. "The Riddle House," he said, spreading an old Ordnance Survey map across Dumbledore's desk while half of the Order crowded around it, faces drawn tight with exhaustion and fear. "Little Hangleton. It's where he was born, where his father's family lived before the Muggle man abandoned them. We've had it flagged in our records for years. Old dark families tend to return to their roots when they think no one's watching, and Voldemort is nothing if not sentimental about the shape of his own origin story, whatever else he claims to have discarded from his old life." "You're certain?" McGonagall said, sharp with the specific fear of a woman who had already lost too many students to guesswork. "I'm not certain of anything tonight, Professor," Crow admitted. "But it's the strongest lead we have, and every hour we spend verifying it is an hour we're not spending getting her back." Harry hadn't spoken much in the 4 hours since the tunnel collapsed. He'd stood at the edge of every planning conversation with his jaw set, and his eyes fixed on some middle distance none of the rest of them could see, and the golden warmth under his ribs, which had settled into something calm and steady over the past 3 weeks, now burned low and constant and furious, a banked fire waiting for permission to become something else entirely. "Then that's where we go," he said. "Now, not at dawn, not after more verification. Now, Harry." Dumbledore's voice, gentle but firm, the tone he used when he needed to be heard through grief rather than around it. "I understand the urgency. I feel it myself, more than you might imagine, but charging into an unknown location, against an enemy who has spent hours preparing for exactly this pursuit, is precisely the mistake he is hoping we make." "I don't care what he's hoping," Harry said, and something in his voice made even Dumbledore go quiet for a moment. "He took Ginny because he thinks it's the one thing that can still hurt me, and he's right, it is. It's working exactly the way he wanted it to work. But I am not going to sit in this castle planning for another 6 hours while she's alone with him. I can't be hurt, Professor. That means I can walk in there and take every risk none of the rest of you can afford to take, and I intend to use that tonight because it's the only thing I have that's actually useful right now. Ron, standing beside him, hollow-eyed and pale but steady, put a hand on Harry's shoulder. "We're coming with you," he said. "Don't even start arguing. She's my sister, Harry. I'm not sitting this one out no matter what you say. I wasn't going to ask you to." "Good." "Because I wasn't going to listen anyway." Hermione was already pulling her coat on, wand secured at her wrist, face set in the particular fierce calm she wore when fear had burned all the way through into pure, focused determination. "Kingsley's assembling a strike team. Dumbledore's coming himself. Crow's people are tracing the wards around the property right now to make sure we're not walking into something worse than we're expecting." She looked at Harry. "We're not letting you go alone, and we're not letting you go without a plan. Both things can be true at once. We just need to move fast while we build it." Harry looked around the room, at Ron's grim determination, at Hermione's fierce competence, at Dumbledore's quiet, steady gravity, at Crow standing near the door with the warded case containing the chalice still clutched tight against his chest, an old man carrying two different kinds of terrible responsibility at once, and felt something in his chest ease just slightly, just enough to breathe through the fury long enough to think clearly. "Okay," he said. "Then let's build it fast." The Riddle house stood at the top of a hill, overlooking a village gone quiet and dark in the late hour, its windows lightless, its garden overgrown with the specific neglect of a building that had been empty for decades, and had never once, in all that time, felt like anywhere a person would want to linger. Harry felt it the moment their small strike team crossed onto the property, a wrongness in the air, old and patient, the particular cold that clung to places where terrible things had happened and never quite finished happening. "He'll know we're here," Crow said quietly, wand already drawn, eyes scanning the dark windows above them. "A property like this belonging to him, there's no chance he hasn't warded every inch of the perimeter." "Good," Harry said. "I don't want to sneak in. I want him to know exactly who's coming." They found the front door unlocked, deliberately, obviously, an invitation as much as an oversight, and the moment Harry stepped across the threshold, the darkness inside the house seemed to gather itself, torches flaring to sudden life along a long entrance hall thick with dust and cobwebs, revealing a staircase leading up into shadow and a closed door at the hall's far end, beneath which a thin line of pale light spilled onto the rotted floorboards. "That's him," Harry said, already moving. "Harry, wait." Hermione's voice urgent, but he was already halfway down the hall, and the rest of them fell in behind him rather than waste precious seconds arguing, wands raised, moving in the tight, practiced formation 6 years of war had drilled into all of them. The door opened before Harry reached it. The room beyond was large, once probably a dining hall, its long table pushed against one wall to clear the floor, and Ginny sat in the center of it, bound to a chair with ropes that pulsed faintly with dark enchantment, her face pale and furious, but Harry's chest nearly collapsed with relief at the sight, unhurt. Her chin raised in exactly the same stubborn defiance she'd shown him 100 times before, even now, even here. Voldemort stood beside her, one hand resting almost casually on the back of her chair, and Bellatrix flanked him on the other side, along with 4 more Death Eaters positioned around the room's edges. Nothing about the tableau looked rushed or desperate. It looked prepared, staged, exactly the way Voldemort wanted it to look. "Harry," Ginny said immediately, voice tight but strong, "don't do whatever he wants you to do. Whatever it is, I mean it." "You heard her," Voldemort said, almost fondly, as though the two of them were sharing some private joke at Harry's expense. "Loyal to the last, even bound to a chair in my late father's house. It's rather touching, really. Almost makes me understand why you're so determined to keep her, Harry. Though I confess the sentiment is entirely lost on me personally." Let her go, Harry said, voice flat and hard, stepping fully into the room now, Ron and Hermione and Dumbledore and Crow fanning out behind him, wands rising to cover the Death Eaters along the walls. This is between you and me. It's always been between you and me. Leave her out of it. I did try telling you that yourself once tonight, Voldemort said. You didn't seem terribly interested in listening if memory serves. Something about coming to get her back and promising the rest of us your patience had run out. His red eyes glittered with something that looked almost like amusement. Well, here you are. Patience run out exactly as promised. I'm curious to see what that actually looks like, from a boy who cannot be hurt by anything I throw at him. You're about to find out. Am I? Voldemort's hand tightened very slightly on the back of Ginny's chair, and the dark ropes binding her pulsed brighter in response, drawing a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain from her that made Harry's whole body go rigid with fury. Careful, Harry. I would hate for this to end badly before we've even had the chance to discuss terms properly. There's no terms, Ron snarled, wand rising toward Voldemort directly. You don't get to negotiate for my sister like she's a hostage in some business deal. She is precisely a hostage in a business deal, Mr. Weasley. That's the entire function she's currently serving, Voldemort said, unbothered. But you're right that we should discuss the terms clearly, so nobody wastes time on misunderstandings. His gaze returned to Harry. Here is the arrangement I propose. You surrender the chalice. I know Director Crow has it on his person even now. Don't insult either of us by pretending otherwise. And in exchange, I release Miss Weasley, unharmed, this very moment. You keep your invincibility. I keep the tool capable of ending it, safely out of the reach of anyone who might use it against me later. Everyone in this room, save perhaps Director Crow, walks away from tonight having lost nothing they weren't already prepared to lose. The room went very still. Don't, Ginny said immediately, sharp and certain, straining against the ropes to look at Harry directly. Harry, don't you dare. That thing is the only weapon that can actually hurt you, and he wants it in his hands more than he wants anything else in this entire war. Don't trade that for me. I mean it. Ginny, I mean IT, Harry. Her voice cracked, not with fear but with fierce, furious love. If you hand him that cup to save me tonight, you're not saving me at all. You're just making sure the next time he wants something from you, he'll know exactly which lever to pull forever, for the rest of both our lives. I would rather die in this chair than watch you become someone he can control that easily. Harry felt something in his chest tear in two different directions at once, the golden fire under his ribs surging hot and desperate, every instinct in him screaming to simply agree, to end this, to get her safe by whatever means necessary. And underneath it, quieter but just as strong, the terrible clarity of understanding that she was right, that this exact moment was the hinge point Crow had warned him about weeks ago. The moment a man's love for the people around him either sharpened his judgment or shattered it completely. I'm not giving him the chalice, Harry said finally, and his voice, when it came, was steadier than he felt. Not because I don't want to save you. I want that more than I've wanted anything in my entire life. But because you're right, and because I think. He looked directly at Voldemort now. I think this whole offer was never really about the chalice at all. Was it? You don't actually think I'd hand it over. You wanted to hear me say number you wanted to watch me choose the weapon over the girl, so you could throw that choice back in my face for the rest of this war. Prove that even the unkillable boy has priorities uglier than he pretends. Something flickered behind Voldemort's red eyes, not quite surprise but close to it, the particular flicker of a man watching his careful strategy read correctly a half-step earlier than he'd planned for. You've grown perceptive, Voldemort said, in your brief time as something more than merely mortal. I've had good teachers, Harry said. So here's my counteroffer. You let her go right now because I'm not negotiating for her at all. And in exchange, you get exactly what you actually came here for tonight, which isn't the chalice and isn't even really her. It's me, a real fight. No hostages, no diversions, no tricks. Just you and me, finally, the way it should have happened from the very beginning of all this 6 years ago. Bellatrix let out a sharp, delighted laugh from her position by the wall. He's offering himself up, my lord. How generous. I'm not offering myself up, Harry said. I'm telling you how this ends tonight, one way or another. Voldemort studied him for a long moment, and then, slowly, deliberately, he released his grip on the back of Ginny's chair and stepped away from her, moving toward the room's open center with the same unhurried, terrible grace he always carried. "Release her," he said to Bellatrix, without looking away from Harry. "My lord, release her, Bellatrix. The boy has offered me something considerably more interesting than a hostage. I intend to take it." Bellatrix's wand flicked, reluctant but obedient, and the dark ropes binding Ginny dissolved into smoke. Ron was moving before she'd even finished standing, pulling his sister free and back toward Dumbledore and Crow near the door, and Ginny, shaking but unbroken, caught Harry's eye across the room one last time. "Don't lose," she said simply. "I don't plan to." What followed wasn't a duel in any sense either of them had experienced before. Not the desperate, scrambling defense Harry had fought in the graveyard at 14. Not the brief, brutal exchange on the Quidditch pitch weeks earlier. It was something closer to a reckoning, 6 years of history compressed into a single room. And Harry understood, the moment Voldemort's wand rose, that this was the fight both of them had been circling toward since the night his parents died. Avada Kedavra. The curse struck him square in the chest, exactly as it had on the Quidditch pitch, exactly as it had failed to kill him a dozen times since, and Harry didn't flinch, didn't fall, simply stood there and let it dissolve harmlessly against his skin while the room held its breath around him. "You'll have to do better than that," he said. "You already know it doesn't work." "I know," Voldemort said, and something in his voice had gone strange, almost thoughtful. "I've known since the moment the first report reached me. I am not testing whether the curse works tonight, Harry. I am testing something else entirely." His wand moved again, faster this time. A rapid sequence of curses Harry didn't recognize, dark and old. And this time, instead of simply standing and absorbing them, Harry moved, dodging, weaving, closing distance with a speed and precision that had nothing to do with invincibility and everything to do with 6 years of hard-won combat instinct. Because invulnerable or not, he decided somewhere in the last few minutes that he wasn't going to fight this battle standing still and letting curses bounce off him like a wall. He was going to fight it like Harry Potter, the boy who'd survived this war on skill and stubbornness long before any golden fire had awakened under his ribs. Because that boy, he suspected, was the version of himself Voldemort actually feared most. He closed the distance in 3 strides and swung, not with his wand but with his fist, catching Voldemort across the jaw with a force that sent the Dark Lord staggering backward into the long table, shock plain on a face that hadn't registered genuine physical pain in decades. "That's new," Voldemort said, recovering, wiping a thin line of blood from his lip with something that looked almost like admiration. "You've decided invincibility doesn't require restraint." "I've decided I'm done being afraid of you," Harry said. "That's different from invincibility. That's just true, and it's been true since the moment I woke up on that pitch and realized you couldn't touch me anymore. I just took a few weeks to actually believe it." Voldemort's wand rose again, and this time the spell that left it wasn't aimed at Harry at all. It swept sideways, toward Ron, toward Hermione, toward Dumbledore near the door. An area effect meant to force them all back, by space, and Harry understood in the half-second before it landed exactly what Voldemort was trying to do. Not defeat him directly, but isolate him again. The same strategy that had cost Ginny her freedom for half a night, deployed now in the middle of the fight itself. He threw himself into the spell's path, absorbing it, and used the half-second of Voldemort's surprise at that choice to close the distance again, wand rising this time. And the spell he cast wasn't one he'd have dared attempt 6 months ago. A binding curse, powerful and precise, cast with a confidence that came from somewhere new inside him, somewhere that had stopped needing to hold anything back out of fear of what unleashed power might cost him personally. Voldemort deflected it barely, staggering with the effort in a way Harry had genuinely never seen from him before. And for the first time in the whole encounter, something like real strain showed on that pale, ageless face. "You've gotten stronger," Voldemort said, breathing harder than Harry had ever heard him breathe. "Not merely unkillable, stronger. The blood does that apparently beyond mere invulnerability. How curious." "Maybe I just stopped holding back," Harry said. "Maybe that's all it ever was. 6 years of being scared to really fight you because I thought losing meant dying and dying meant everyone I love loses too. I'm not scared of that anymore. Not for me anyway. And it turns out that's most of what was ever holding me back in the first place." He pressed forward, and Voldemort, for the first time in the recorded history of this entire war, found himself genuinely, unmistakably on the defensive, not because his skill had diminished, not because his magic had weakened, but because the boy across from him had finally, completely, stopped fighting like someone with something left to lose personally, and had started fighting like someone with nothing left to fear at all, which was, Crow would later observe with grim, weary understanding, exactly the difference between an ordinary talented wizard and a bearer of the undying blood who had finally, fully accepted what he was. Bellatrix moved to intervene, wand rising toward Harry's exposed back, and Ron's curse caught her first, sharp and sudden. 6 years of friendship finally paying itself forward in the one moment it mattered most, and she went down hard against the far wall, stunned cold. "Anyone else feel like helping him?" Ron called out, to the remaining Death Eaters along the walls, wand still raised, voice shaking with adrenaline but steady with intent. "Because we're rather in the mood to finish this properly tonight." The Death Eaters, watching their master genuinely struggling for the first time any of them had ever witnessed, made the calculation that men who value their own survival tend to make in exactly that kind of moment, and one by one, they didn't intervene at all. Voldemort, seeing it, understanding exactly what their hesitation meant, let out a sound that might once have been a laugh and now came out something closer to a snarl. "Cowards," he said, to the room at large, not looking away from Harry. "All of you, fine. I never needed them for this anyway." He came at Harry with everything he had left. A final, desperate sequence of curses, dark and old and genuinely, catastrophically powerful magic that would have leveled a city block had it landed anywhere except against a boy whose blood simply refused, on some level far older than magic itself, to accept the concept of being harmed. Harry walked through all of it. He crossed the last few feet of distance while curses shattered against him one after another, and when he finally reached Voldemort, wand rising, he didn't cast a killing spell. He'd thought about it, in the seconds before, thought hard about whether this needed to end with Voldemort dead on the floor of his father's old dining hall, and had decided, with a clarity that surprised even himself, that this particular ending deserved to be something other than another death, added to a war already drowning in them. He disarmed him instead, the same simple spell he'd used against Bellatrix in Hogsmeade weeks earlier, cast now with enough raw force behind it that Voldemort's wand tore from his grip and skittered across the floor, and Harry followed it with a binding curse that wrapped tight and absolute around the Dark Lord's arms and legs, dropping him hard to his knees on the rotted floorboards of the house he'd been born in. The room went utterly silent. Voldemort knelt there, bound, disarmed, breathing hard, and looked up at Harry with an expression that had no name Harry had ever seen on that face before. Not fear exactly, though there was something of that in it, but something else too, something closer to genuine, dawning bewilderment at finding himself, for the first time in 50 years, entirely at someone else's mercy. "Finish it," Voldemort said, and his voice, for the first time in Harry's entire experience of him, carried something close to weariness. "You've beaten me. Genuinely beaten me, not through luck, not through some old sacrifice of your mother's, but through your own strength standing in front of me. Finish it, Harry. That's what this war has always been building toward." Harry stood over him for a long moment, wand still raised, and felt the golden fire under his ribs settle slowly into something calm and clear and entirely his own. "No," he said. Voldemort's brow furrowed, genuine confusion cracking through the weariness. "No, I'm not going to kill you," Harry said. "Not because I forgive you. Not because I think you deserve mercy. You don't. Not after everything. Not after my parents, not after Sirius, not after tonight and Ginny and every single thing you've done to try to break the people I love because you couldn't break me directly." He paused. "I'm not killing you because I've spent the last 3 weeks learning what it means to have power that nobody can take away from me, and I decided, somewhere in that room back at Hogwarts tonight, exactly what kind of person I want to be with it. And that person doesn't execute a man kneeling in front of him, even a man like you. That's not strength. That's just cruelty with better justification attached." "Then what?" Voldemort said, something dangerous flickering back into his eyes despite the binding curse still holding him fast. "Do you intend to do with me instead? Lock me away, the way this world has always failed to properly contain me before?" "That's not up to me," Harry said, and looked past him, toward the door, where Dumbledore and Crow stood watching, both faces carrying the particular weight of men who understood exactly what came next. "That's up to people who have spent a lot longer than I have thinking about what justice actually looks like, once the fighting's over." What happened to Voldemort afterward would become, in the years that followed, the subject of considerable debate across Wizarding Britain: trial, imprisonment in a specially reinforced section of Azkaban warded by both Ministry and Concordat expertise working together for the first time in 2 centuries. A sentence that gave him nothing resembling the mercy he'd shown anyone else across 50 years of terror. But that also, deliberately, refused to give the war the tidy, violent ending everyone had spent a generation expecting. Harry never visited him, not once, though he was asked many times over the following years, by historians and journalists, and once memorably, by Rita Skeeter herself, exactly why he'd chosen mercy over the ending everyone had been braced for. His answer, every time, was the same simple truth. "Because I decided a long time ago what kind of person I wanted to be, and it turns out that decision mattered more than anything the fight itself could have proven." They walked out of the Riddle house together as the first gray edge of dawn crept over the hills, exhausted, battered, alive in every sense that mattered. Ginny walked close beside Harry the whole way down the hill, her hand tight in his, and neither of them spoke much, because there wasn't much left to say that the silence between them didn't already carry perfectly well on its own. Crow fell into step beside Harry near the bottom of the hill, the warded case still clutched against his chest, though something in his posture had eased considerably since the fight, some old weight finally, partially, set down. "I watched you make that choice back there," he said quietly. "Not killing him when you had every right to, when the whole war would have understood it completely. That's the exact moment I've spent 31 years dreading, watching for, preparing weapons against. And you made it, and you made it correctly without anyone forcing you to. Does that mean you're finally going to stop worrying about me becoming your brother?" Harry asked. Crow considered the question with real seriousness, the way he considered everything. "No," he said finally, honest as always. "I don't think I'll ever fully stop worrying about that, Mr. Potter." Grief like mine doesn't simply switch off because one night went well. But I think, watching you tonight, I finally believe there's a real difference between you and Elia's, and it isn't the power at all. It's what you choose to do with the space around it. He forgot, somewhere along the way, that other people's choices mattered as much as his own invincibility did. You haven't forgotten that. I don't think you're going to. What happens to the chalice now? Hermione asked, falling into step on Harry's other side. It goes back into hiding, Crow said. Somewhere safer than a stone room beneath a school this time, now that we've all learned exactly how thin that safety actually was. But it stays built, and it stays ready, because I think the honest truth, Miss Granger, is that the world will probably need it again someday, whether that's Mr. Potter or someone else entirely. That's simply the nature of power like this. It doesn't disappear because one story ends well. It just waits for the next one. Harry thought about that for a long moment, walking down the last stretch of hill toward the waiting Order members and the portkeys that would carry them home, Ginny's hand warm in his, Ron and Hermione close behind, the golden fire under his ribs banked low and steady and entirely, finally, at peace with itself. Then I hope whoever it is, he said quietly, has people around them half as good as the ones I've got. 3 weeks later, Hogwarts held its end-of-term feast a little early, at Dumbledore's insistence, a celebration the whole castle badly needed after everything, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Ginny, half listening to Hermione argue with Neville about NEWT preparation, and felt, for the first time since a green light had swallowed his whole world on a Quidditch pitch 2 months earlier, something close to simple, uncomplicated happiness. He wasn't hiding what he was anymore, hadn't for weeks now, wouldn't ever again because he'd learned, through Crow's grief and Voldemort's cruelty and Ginny's fierce, unbreakable love, that the version of strength worth having wasn't the kind you kept quiet out of fear of what people might think, but the kind you carried openly, carefully, in service of the people you loved rather than in spite of them. "You're doing that thing again," Ginny said, elbowing him lightly. "The thoughtful staring into space thing." "Just thinking about," Harry considered the question, looking around the great hall at the candle-lit ceiling, at Ron laughing at something George had said from further down the table, at Hermione's careful, exasperated fondness, as she corrected Neville's essay outline for the 3rd time, at Ginny's steady, warm presence beside him, at Dumbledore up at the staff table watching the whole scene with the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who'd feared, not long ago, that none of them might live to see this exact, ordinary evening at all. "About how I used to think surviving was the whole point," Harry said finally. "Like the entire war was just about whether I lived or died, and everything else was just details underneath that. And now I can't die, not really, not from anything that's tried so far, and it turns out that was never actually the point at all." "So what's the point then?" Ginny asked, though something in her voice said she already suspected the answer. Harry looked at her and at Ron and at Hermione and at the whole warm, noisy, imperfect world stretching out around him, and felt the golden fire under his ribs settle into something that finally, completely, felt like simply being alive. "This," he said, "just this, being here, getting to keep it." Outside, beyond the tall windows of the great hall, the first real snow of winter had begun to fall, soft and quiet over grounds that had seen war and would someday likely see it again, but not tonight, and not for a good long while yet, and that, Harry had finally learned after everything, was worth exactly as much as invincibility ever could be.